This week, Roger Grimes, data-driven defense evangelist for KnowBe4, joins us to discuss the evolution and maturity of the cybersecurity industry. Then Matt Linton, chaos specialist at Google, joins us to discuss a whole bunch of stuff. It's not on my teleprompter, but it's going to be a great interview, trust me. In the security news, it's still not illegal to look at HTML source code. Noblium strikes again. NPM infections. Gas is cheap in Iran, if you can get it. Google Tensor, going beyond the transport layer with HTTPS. Buying a power plant. EBSDIC and GDPR. How children can infect parents, signing your rootkit, dates are hard, something smells funny, and bird poop in your antenna. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man seeking one night stand. Possibly two, because he's got two lamps. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 716, recorded on October 27th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, broadcasting live for the first time, maybe ever, on a Wednesday night. We've been on a Thursday night schedule for the better part of 15 years, and we've moved to Wednesday nights. I feel like it's like the old school TV lineup changes where they tell you the show's moving to a different night. But we're going to press forward on Wednesday nights. Mr. Larry Pesce is here with me in studio. Welcome, Larry.
Thanks.
What do you got there? It's the thing Josh had last week, no?
Yeah, it's the iCopy X from...
the RFID cloner reader.
Nikola T Labs, which, speaking of Nikola T Labs, if I may, real quick, a buddy of mine, Monte Elkins, sent me over some fun little stuff. Came in the mail today. 1,000 dinar from Yugoslavia.
Ooh, interesting.
Featuring Nikolai Tesla.
Oh, that's really
and
good.
My kids thought this was amazing because, the 1,000 dinar and then 4,000 dinar and 10 billion dinar.
Which in US dollars is...
It's like $3.
$3.
Something ridiculous like
$3.
that. But,
fantastic.
Some neat stuff.
On the lines remotely, Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here, and looking forward to a fun evening tonight.
Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure being on the opening night of Wednesday Night Hell. Mayhem. Whatever the hell this is.
Also, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Now that I just told the entire world that it's your birthday today, hopefully that's not your password. It shouldn't be.
No, it's not my password, and of course my birthday is January 1st, Oh, crap.
Don't give
50 years.
50 years. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Josh. It's freaking awesome. Now you got to go change your security questions on a few things, but it's okay.
It's okay.
They don't align with reality. They align with things I have different things.
Very true.
It's just hard to remember the lies. Just got to remember the lies, right?
That's it. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
No matter how old you are, Josh, I'm older.
It's very true.
You will win that race, Jeff. That's totally
Every time.
Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December through the 5th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, Dave Kennedy, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked. Check out our rock star lineup. Joining us for this segment is Roger Grimes. Roger's a 34-year. Oh, sorry. I'm going to do an introduction first, Roger. You're very anxious to jump in. I love the enthusiasm. I want to tell people how important it is and how wonderful it is to have you on the show. Roger's a 34-year computer security veteran, author of 13 books and over 1,100, although you said 1,200 articles on computer security. Tonight, Roger joins us to discuss preventing ransomware. Roger's articles have also influenced this show very much. I think we've been covering Roger's articles for the better part of 16 years. So, Roger, thank you so much, and welcome to the show.
I am glad to be here, but I should be silent now, right? When you pan to me, now I should be silent.
Right, then you're doing the opposite of what.
That is how this works.
It's okay. We'll get in a groove, Roger. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, and the bio said 1,100 articles, but that was like a week ago when I sent it to you, so that's why I'm on 1,200.
There you go. Roger, how'd you get your start in information security?
I was actually a CPA when I kind of got out of college, but I was a horrible CPA. I literally didn't finish anything the CPA firm gave me. I took all the tax returns and stuff, and I shoved them in the back of a drawer that I knew that it was falling like in back of the file cabinet. And so I wonder if those people ever got their taxes done. But I always kind of was drawn to computer security ever since the very beginning. And I read a couple of books like Flu Shot by Ross Greenberg. He's one of the early antivirus guys. I ended up disassembling DOS viruses for John McAfee. And I really just, early on had just really this insane interest in fighting hackers and stuff like that. And it just, eventually I went into IT and network security and became VP of IT. But the entire time, whatever job I had, even VP of IT, I was totally neglecting that job and not doing budgets and, staff management. I was always neglecting to do computer security. And so one day I woke up and I went, I should do this full time. So I've been doing it full time for probably 20 years. But before that, it was part-time, full-time, but now it's like all I do. And I love it. I think I'd rather be a billionaire that's retired. I think I could keep myself, occupied. I wouldn't be bored. But if I have to work for a living, I really love doing computer security. It's a good fit and I enjoy it.
And so have you always kept kind of technical and kind of in the trenches to kind of supplement some of your writing? I mean, it seems that way reading some of your articles, Roger.
Yeah, I would say the favorite part of anything I've ever done is penetration testing. And I did penetration testing either full-time or part-time for 22 years and did it for Foundstone and other places. And I love that. That's if I could do any one thing and make a ton of money, it would be penetration testing. But, even it's just tough to only do that. But I really love getting my hands in there. And I can remember everyone's trying to promote me to senior management, even Microsoft. I was at Microsoft for 11 years, and I was the first person that was in the field that got promoted to the first level of senior management, what they call level 65. But they wanted me to manage people. I'm like, I don't want to manage people. I've tried that. I'm horrible at it. I become friends with people, and I can't yell at them and that sort of stuff. But I really like getting my hands, staying in the dirt. And, and I think every computer security person, you have that moment where, if they want to send you up through management, you have to start letting your skills go. And I literally actively fought against that happening and tried to keep myself, not only that, but you kind of have to relearn everything every 5 years. So you have to figure out, is this thing taking off? Is the cloud taking off? These days, like it's the quantum stuff I'm into, but you have to, in this field, stay up with the technology. You're always kind of guessing like what's going to be like, should I follow that? Like maybe like these days, mobile phones, right, are being attacked a lot. Well, I was trying to figure out that I need to follow mobile security in the days of the Apple Newton and the HP Compacts, you're looking at this thing saying, is that going to be something? And if it's going to be something, then I need to go learn about it so I can help secure it, because whatever becomes popular gets hacked. And so, I went from being the first viruses I ever fought were on Apple computers, Elk Cloner made by 15-year-old Richard Sclarenta, who ended up becoming like a millionaire working for some Time Warner company. But then I got into DOS viruses with John McAfee, then Windows viruses, then macro viruses when they all the rage. So I was constantly kind of reinventing my career. And I think that's what makes our job, IT or IT security, the toughest profession in the world. Like, I was married to a doctor and she didn't ever learn anything. Like, she didn't have to do anything. Like, and if she had to learn something new, like a new way of doing operation or anesthesia, they like gave her in-house training. Whereas I'm like constantly reading in my car. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm reading on the toilet. When the lady's cutting my hair, I'm literally like, I hope you're not offended, but I'm going to read. Like, because you constantly have to keep up on stuff. This is a very, very aggressive career to have, that because you're always constantly, like, someone will just say something new, like you'll hear something in the background like the Tor network, and all of a sudden you're like, I never heard of that. What is that? I have to go look and see if it's something I need to be aware of. So it's a very it can be, I don't want to say stressful, but it takes a lot of energy, but at the same time, that's exactly why I love it. A lot of it doesn't stay the same. How hackers hack stays the same, but what they hack, that changes about every 5 years.
Roger, how do
Sounds like you need to write a book. I would love to read the book about how to stay technical and not have to manage people.
Yeah.
I think
managing people sucks. I can't even manage myself well.
I think they call that, I love the title, I know Cisco uses it and a few other organizations, of distinguished engineer, which is like one of the highest level engineering positions. And I do agree. I think pursuing a career in an engineering field should be a thing without having to be forced into becoming a manager.
Yeah. I mean, and as a matter of fact, I think that it causes a disservice to our organizations and to the cybersecurity industry in general when you kind of take these very smart people and you're kind of like, hey, do you want to make more money? Well, if so, you need to make this jump. And that is kind of unfortunate because there are like, we've all run into these people that are like, oh my God, this guy knows so much about USB, and USB attacks and stuff. But eventually that person is kind of, buttonholed into, well, if you want to make more money, you got to start managing teams and people. And it was interesting. I knew I was turning down better money, at least early on, by fighting going into management or wanting to stay in. I remember even calling my wife one day. I was the senior VP of IT of a large company, and I was telling her, I'm going to quit this and go into computer security full time. She's like trying to talk me out of it. She's like, no, because we lived in a nice house with a pool and our kids went to private school and everything. I'm like, yep, I'm going to quit all of that, just do computer security full time. She's like, well, go into an IT firm and maybe you do computer security, because this is going to be funny. I remember we weren't sure that computer security was going to be an ongoing career. I mean, John McAfee's virus scan was detecting all the viruses. We were starting to arrest some of the more notable hackers like Kevin Mitnick. There was a brief time in our industry at the end of the 90s, kind of beginning of the 2000s, where it looked like we might actually defeat the problem. We might defeat hackers and malware. And I remember thinking, well, even though I think they're going to cut down on viruses and they're going to arrest a lot of hackers, there's going to be more computers and more devices in the future. So overall, it'll probably be the same. I laugh hysterically that I was wondering whether this was going to be a career. I now know that I could retire in 20 years and there'd be plenty of stuff to fight. I mean, but at some back in the day, we actually thought we might win.
Remember, the president, was it a president of IBM, said, I think there's going to be a market for 5 computers in the world. Total. Yeah. Just by the way, total. Like, that's on my desk. I think I have more than that on my desk. But I mean, I've got a few Raspberry Pis and a NUC and anyway. But I mean, that's literally what they thought. So you thinking, hey, we might win the war on cybersecurity is not so far out of reality for the time.
Well, and they're saying the same thing now about quantum computers. So like, people are asking me, I wrote a book on quantum computers and cryptography, and soon sufficiently capable quantum computers are going to break our modern day asymmetric crypto, and it cuts in half the strength of our symmetric algorithms. But there are people
soon is the problem.
Yeah, I think it's already been done personally. That's my personal opinion. But at the outside, if you ask the person on the very outside, they're saying 2030. And the real answer is probably sooner than that, but probably within a couple of years. But there are people saying, do you think we'll have quantum computers in every desktop? I'm like, of course, they're going to be everywhere. Yeah. But you have people saying there's no way because they take up big rooms, and I'm like, you know what? One day they won't. They'll just be in the chip.
Do you think that China has a quantum computer? Do you think these exist?
So we have hundreds. There are hundreds of quantum computers. All around the world, hundreds just in the United States. So what you really want to say is, are there quantum computers sufficiently capable of breaking encryption like
Correct.
we think about it?
Yes.
certainly the best candidates for that are us and China. And China is certainly very aggressive. They're very proud of it, and they spend billions. Like we're spending billions too, but $1 billion actually goes a lot farther in China than it does here. And it literally is a national pastime. Like in China, if you go to the average person and you say the term quantum computing, they know what you're talking about. That is not the case here in America. And they're making great strides, not only in quantum computers, but quantum networking. And let me say, there's a lot of other countries that are into it, Australia and New Zealand. They're actually making great strides in putting quantum on a chip. So when people say, oh, do you think we'll have quantum on your desktop? Yes, because there is an entire nation full of researchers that are discovering quite well of how to put it on a chip and do what's called photonics and stuff. But China, they're either ahead of us or we're ahead of them, each one by kind of a little bit. Either one of those nations, us or China, could actually already have a sufficiently capable quantum computer that we don't know about yet because the NSA is hiding it. You need only about 9,000 stable quantum bits or qubits to start. They have to be stable, and that's the problem. They're not all stable, or as you get to greater numbers, it's hard to keep them stable and working together. And entanglement is what it's called. But the greatest number that we know about publicly, I think, is 72 stable qubits. That's what's been announced by, I think it was Google, but a couple, and IBM's close and that sort of stuff. But I have a lot of friends in the industry that think that their quantum computers will have literally millions of qubits in a couple of years. And I'm like, well, how do you get from 72 to 1 million in a couple of years if you don't have some that already have thousands? So, and it's kind of weird. A couple of years ago, every single time a quantum computer got more stable qubits, they would announce it. There's even a website that tracks it. Okay, we had 2 and 4 and 8 and 16 and blah, 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 up to 72. And then about 2 years ago, all of a sudden, nobody is reporting their quantum qubits. Like nobody. It's never been updated. We're still at 72 years later. So that either means we found this technological barrier that prevented us from going past that, or people decided we're making sufficiently capable computers where we need to be quiet about it now because ours could be used by the NSA and the government and stuff to start attacking stuff. So my money is on it's already been done or it's close.
It begs the question, though, whatever happened to superconductors? Because that was a big deal like 20 years ago, and then you never heard anything about it again.
Well,
there's been a lot done with it. Most of the quantum computers work on superconducting. There's a lot of different types of called annealing, and there's about 30 different types of quantum computers, and the most common type is superconducting, and they're actually using buckyballs, if you know that, the buckyballs and stuff like that to make superconducting. And they've learned how to make superconducting materials that work at room temperature. They don't need to be, near the, negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit, absolute Kelvin anymore. Yeah. We're making very steady progress. I think the part that disappeared was I thought they were going to tell us we had elevated mag trains and everything, like that was going to be the norm. My college, my alma mater of Old Dominion University, even made like a super conducting elevated train track that was supposed to be super conducting, and they quietly dismantled that and went away. So I think it's taken longer than they thought, but at the quantum level, a lot of the quantum computers work on that and work quite well at that.
Roger, when did you get into the whole writing thing? We obviously have a pretty good command, of the technical aspects. Not everyone that has that can actually write.
Yeah, I can remember exactly. So I was fighting DOS viruses, and IBM came to me through. I'd written a couple of free articles and had written some reviews about there were antivirus hardware cards that you could put in your computer that would fight. That was back in the day. Like you'd buy an add-in card that would break copy protection. Because disk had copy protection, so you couldn't illegally copy them. Copy 2PC, I think, was the name. And then there was this other thing. There was like an antivirus thing. You plug this card in, and it protects your computer from viruses. So I wrote for a free card. I wrote a review article. Well, IBM saw that, and I remember they came to me and they said, "We'd like you to write our paper on computer viruses." At the time, so this is probably 88, 89, something like that, maybe 90. But what's weird here is, believe it or not, even though there were computer viruses ever since 1986, Pakistani Brain and Elk Cloner and some other ones, it literally was hypothesis. Many people believe they didn't exist. John Dorvac of PC Magazine, he was a big columnist for a lot of years. He actually wrote a column saying they were fake. even when computer viruses were spreading around the world and infecting people. But he's like, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. And we're like, and those of us who work with him was like, oh my God, this guy's he doesn't know what he doesn't know. But IBM said, we'd like you to write the definitive paper. And I was a kid. I say kid, I was like 19 or 20 or something. And they said, how much do you want to write it for? We want you to write this white paper on computer viruses and how IBM's approach to fighting viruses and stuff. And I thought about it, and I would have done it for free, right? It's for IBM, right? They're the big brand name at the time, even bigger than Microsoft. And I would have done it for free. But then I said, okay, they're saying I can charge or whatever. Well, I talked to my wife and I talked to people, and I finally came back and I got my courage up and said, okay, I'll charge you $1,000 or whatever. And I remember the guy, the lawyer, he may still be alive, Ken Kuykendall. I remember the guy. And he's like, $1,000? I can't cut a PO for that. I'm going to at least have to pay you $10,000. And that's what it became. $10,000 was my first paid assignment. And from there, I have a twin brother. He's a better writer than I am. And we ended up having a computer column in the local newspaper called Double Click, because we were twins, that ran for a couple of years, and it kind of spread out from there. And I eventually met my current wife, and her son was hacking people on AOL, and I was trying to stop him from hacking. And from what I learned, I ended up writing my first book for O'Reilly called Malicious Mobile Code, Virus Protection for Windows. And that kind of, once you get your first book, the rest just kind of come. And let me say, what's hilarious is that I'm an idiot. I failed English twice in high school, which meant I was taking 3 Englishes my senior year. I barely got into college. I failed out of college my first year. I will say I had a really great time the first year, but I wasn't really studying. And I failed math. I failed science. I failed chemistry, biology. Couldn't even think about taking physics. The idea, anyone that knows me from back in like high school days, if you say, yeah, that Roger Grimes has written 3 books on computer security, they would go, nah. And then if you tell them I wrote a book on quantum physics, I'm guaranteeing nobody, I don't believe that I wrote a book on quantum physics. So it's kind of ironic. And people say, well, you must have been smart and you didn't apply yourself. Nope, I was stupid and I didn't apply myself. But, life takes some weird turns.
That's an amazing story, Roger. What kind of stuff do you really like writing about the most in terms of when you write your articles for? I mean, because who are you writing for today?
Yeah, so the last couple of books have been from Wiley, and I like the quantum stuff. Just I really get into the quantum physics. I'm actually writing a book on particle physics right now called "So You Didn't Think You Would Understand Particle Physics," and I'm going to try to take the reader through step by step from a beginning understanding of atoms and molecules and electrons all the way to quantum field theory. We'll see how it goes. But the stuff that I really love, I did one today. I just published one on LinkedIn today called Nuclear Ransomware 3.0. It's about to get worse. My favorite articles are when I can see a trend happening, and maybe, I'm really not that great of a writer. I can't sing, I can't dance, I can't blah, 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 blah. But I do have a talent that if I see something kind of happening, I can see the trend building, and I go, oh, that's something notable. It's like back in November, December of 2019, I realized that ransomware, as an example, that ransomware was not only encrypting people, but it was starting to exfiltrate data and credentials. And I just saw it happen a couple of times. And I went, oh. And I wrote an article called Nuclear Ransomware that, hey, you're going to have to worry about more than just encryption. These malware programs now, they're exfiltrating your data and your credentials. And even if you have a good backup, it's not going to be enough. And I wrote an article and I started writing about something. And so today I released one called Nuclear Ransomware 3.0 about what the next stage is. And I believe that and maybe it's just because I've been around for 34 years, I've seen how these trends build. Or I wrote a book called Hacking MFA. I could see that MFA finally, after 20 years, it was finally going to start to reach critical mass. So my favorite articles are to write about trends of things coming. And I don't like to write about what everybody else is writing about. I really don't. It bores me, and I won't even do it. I want to write about it in a new angle, in a new way that I've seen something that somebody else hasn't seen. I want it to be an original idea, an original viewpoint, oftentimes contrarian. Like the other day, let me tell you another one. And by the way, you'll notice I never shut up. But
you're very easy interview, Roger.
Yeah, the article that I wrote last week was basically calling out the entire MFA industry for producing overly hackable MFA. The whole reason everybody's moving from passwords to multi-factor authentication is because you can be phished. But 80-90% of the MFA solutions used today are very phishable. We are selling people a false bill of goods. We're getting ready to make everybody do a massive migration, and the vast majority of it can be phished around with a simple phishing email.
Yeah,
and
so Roger, we talked about your article. We covered it last week on the show. I think we agreed with you, and I think we took a kind of a step back from the weeds of the article and was like, wait, I never thought of MFA as protection against phishing. We established that MFA is a decent defense against password spraying and password brute forcing, but not necessarily phishing. And I think it's a shame that people in the industry think of it this way and sell it that way.
Wait a minute. Google actually did a study. They handed out the physical access tokens to all their employees, and I can. It's been a while, but I can pretty much quote it. They said that the physical access tokens
99% of all hacking.
No.
Google says it.
That's not.
Microsoft says it.
That's not true. You're wrong, Roger. Bear with me a second.
Okay.
They said that the physical access tokens stopped 100%. Actually, it was 99.9%. They rounded to 100, and they said we rounded to 100. It was like 3 cases. Over, I think it was 250,000 employees of phishing. They didn't say hacking. They specifically said phishing. That's a very big difference. Let's be clear.
Big leap, yeah.
So, but they said that the physical access tokens, which are a form of MFA, stopped phishing.
Yeah. So you're right. And but they've since changed it. Now they're promoting that it stops. I swear to God, because this is something I talk about all the time. Both Google and Microsoft and the entire cyber security insurance industry now says MFA stops 99% of all hacking. I heard it from Microsoft.
Yeah, but I think we need to obviously clarify MFA and the different types of MFA and what's effective at stopping phishing and what isn't.
It's the new holy grail by many people. So what Google said was correct. They had their experiment where at the time it was kind of like YubiKeys. This is what they were handing out.
Google had their token. Did they kill it like most of their other?
No, it's still.
So they stopped using YubiKeys, and now they have their own wireless and USB.
USB and
Google
Bluetooth.
Titan
It's the
key.
Titan.
The Titan.
Yeah. Which these are kind of hilarious because they look like MFA, but you plug them in and you push your button, right? So that means if you lose this, anybody finding it can log in as you. And everybody calls these MFA. They're not. They're single MF. They're single. Or if you get, it's push-based authentication, right? I do one thing. I don't have to put in a pen. I've got most people would think that it fights phishing. Interesting about the password spraying attacks and stuff. Acme published a stat that said 65% of all password spray attacks were against APIs, application programming interfaces, and on those you can't use MFA at all.
Well, yeah, that's we just go around it. Tyler,
I was going to say this is only addressing a very small portion of what hacking is, or even what cyber criminals. We won't even go APT. Like we'll go cyber criminals and ransomware, right? Like this is only addressing the initial access piece of what most places are doing. So you talk about physical, you talk about drive-by credentials, anything that's executing code, any of the 0 days these are all very small. This is initial access. Then we talk about when it gets deployed in there. You got lateral movement, you got a credentials abuse, you've got all the Active Directory stuff that has come down the pipe. Like I agree that this is a good step in the right direction, but those are some pretty blatant claims that I've never been impeded by in all of my hacking expeditions. So like what are they claiming to actually stop?
Well, it depends. I mean, so the claims frequently, I'm not making this up, stops 99% of all hacking. So Microsoft and Google, they started out by saying we implemented MFA and it stopped. And let me say, Microsoft was even very clear that it stopped 99% of authentication attacks. Google stated it stopped 99.9% of phishing attacks in this limited study. But all of those stats have now been moved out, and the people talking about it, even from Microsoft. I was at a big conference a week or two ago about MFA, and the senior Microsoft executive there literally said MFA stops 99% of all attacks. And, you know, she could have been just being overly zealous and just talking loosely. But like, you know, unpatched software is responsible for 20 to 40% of attacks, and MFA doesn't stop that. And once I'm an attacker on, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but once you're on an Active Directory network, even if you don't quote unquote have a password, there is, you know, a hash associated with your account, and I can replay that hash and log into anywhere I want to once I'm on the network. So you're right that so the MFA might prevent them in some cases from getting on the network. Or I ask myself, just asking, MFA is a good thing to have. You should have an MFA. What percentage of overall attacks does using MFA stop? It stops, you know, probably half the phishing attacks where they ask for a password. If you don't have a password to give, you know, because you're using MFA, it stops that. But I asked myself and a bunch of my friends and said, okay, what percentage of total hacker attacks, malware and hacker attacks, do you think malware would stop? MFA would stop. And I was guessing somewhere between 20 to 30%. And some of my friends went 20 to 40%. But we're saying at max, it's really stopping maybe 40%, which is not small. That's a pretty big percentage. It just isn't 99%, which that's the way a lot of people are talking about it today, unfortunately.
Especially when you start to think about the ransomware and where it shifted to operators on keyboard, right? Like you're getting the initial access by bribing and paying, you know, disgruntled employees to infect it, or you're leveraging things like Azure AD Connect, where application permissions are being abused to then traverse into on-premise via hybrid attack. None of those things are going to be affected by an MFA token. If I'm going to move around your network, I'm going to be using WMI, I'm going to be using WinRM, RDP. I'm probably going to blend in and look just like your users. So most of your users internally aren't even going to be using that once they've logged in. So again, we're back to, good thing to have on external services, not a panacea by any means of the stretch of imagination.
80 to 90% of it's phishable using an email. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Roger, I do want to segue and talk a little more about ransomware, because I think we talk about it a lot, but not in the context that it's the result, it's the impact, not necessarily the problem. Because there's a lot of problems that lead up to a ransomware attack.
If you get rid of, if I was to be a wizard, wave a wand and ransomware is no more, you're still going to be infiltrated by hackers if you haven't closed the methods they use to gain access, right? Mm-hmm. Before ransomware, we had problems. It was remote backdoor Trojans. It was past the hash attacks. It was key logging. You know, your problem isn't ransomware. Ransomware is the outcome of your real problem, which is how are they gaining access and moving laterally. And if you don't solve those problems when you solve ransomware, it's just something else that's going to fill the block. It's whack-a-mole, right? We're always chasing the next shiny object. And what we should be doing, if you want to stop somebody from breaking into your house, you should figure out how they're breaking into your house. Because if you don't figure that out and stop it, then there always going to be somebody that breaks into your house. Like, are they breaking in through the windows? Are they breaking through the doors? Are they breaking through the attic? Are they breaking through the walls, the floors? You've got to figure out how they're breaking in, close those avenues of attack, because if you don't close those openings, it's just going to be something else.
Well, I mean, it's always something else. There's always something going on, some new attack surface, some new hack, some new technology that the CEO mandated you must buy, and that's got 40 different vulnerabilities in it, of course. So, I mean, in reality, the idea that you can close your windows and doors, great, but there's always a construction guy working on that end of the house. You know what I mean? So, but in today's attack surface world, where we've actually got companies trying to manage attack surface, which I think is an interesting premise. I haven't really seen too much about that, so I'm not claiming to know very much. But in this world, how do you close your windows and doors appropriately?
Well, I think at the very minimum, you need to concentrate. So like through my research, and I've been looking at it for 22 years, social engineering is responsible for 70 to 90% of all attacks. Unpatched software is 20 to 40%, and they often overlap. And then some third thing that tends to change over time. These days, it's password guessing, password spray attacks, or I know your password. But those two or three things account for 99% of all hacking. 99%. But the percentage
where are you getting that data from?
I can give you lots of data, including my own research. If people email me at rogerg@noblefor.com, I'll send it to you. So lots of it is from data of the companies I worked for. I have a lot of public data. So I've got lots of I can send you my articles that explain how I derived that. So let me say that you can't find a computer security report that doesn't say that social engineering isn't the number one cause of all attacks.
No. I was not disputing that social engineering was number one. I totally respect that that's entirely possible. I was explaining that 99% of that data, to say that 99% of hacks are from three categories is a fascinating assertion. And I'd love to see the public data behind that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I do have a lot of that, and I've been tracking it for a long time. Some of it is through private data that I can't share. Other stuff, like I went through the Privacy Clearinghouse database for years, and every time there was an attack, I would find out how did that attack occur. And then sometimes it's not in the newspaper, and I would reach out to the company and see if they would share it with me. I work for a very large, one of the largest companies in the world that has a lot of attack data. That data I can't share, but I've certainly been researching with both public and private data, and I can certainly share the public data with you. So the average computer report says that social engineering, as an example, is responsible for somewhere between 50 to 92%. And what's interesting is I really can't go the last 2%. The highest percentage that I've ever found in my research is 90%. So it ranges between 70 to 90%. So one thing, social engineering, if you fix, at the minimum, will get rid of 70% of your risk. And unpatched software, 20 to 40%. Well, in 2015, Cisco released a report that said unpatched Oracle Java was responsible for 91% of web exploits by itself. And by the way, Microsoft had published for years that unpatched Java was the number one problem, and it had been backed up for like 7 years. So
yeah, I think a lot of the studies, Roger, I mean, I call bullshit on, but the ones that I like are ones like you just said, where multiple studies back up the same data points, right? The same theories. So
no, you're right. A lot of it is crap. Even some of the good studies, like I love the Verizon data breach report, but they'll have this statement that will say something, and I'll go, wow, let me go research that. And I frequently write to the authors of the studies, and let me say many, many times the data they have does not back up the conclusion that's being printed in the report.
Is this, if that's the number one problem, is this something that we can solve via a technological mitigation? Or we've been preaching that user training, end user training, like that's the panacea, that's the key to doing this, is doing that well and doing that right. I believe that has some effect, but really, if we look at how a lot of this happens, and we expect the end user that has a 15-second attention span with their TikTok and an understanding of a very basic set of skills, how can we actually come up with a technological fix gap for this? Or is it really training that we're just not doing well?
It's always the combination of policies, technical defenses, and education. I mean, it had a couple of weeks ago, I was shocked because I kind of thought push-based authentication, where you get sent this prompt, are you logging in, yes or no? And it even many times has your location, that's a pretty strong multi-factor authentication. But when I talked to penetration testers, they said no, that it turns out in some cases, 3 of 5 employees are approving a login that they're not involved in. Or in this case, I was talking to a CEO of a Midwestern firm, and they'd been compromised by ransomware, $25 million, and nobody knows that was paid, but what this company had to pay. And they turned out that their CISO was the guy that allowed the ransomware in. And get this, we found out that it was over 20 times that the ransomware attacker was allowed to log in, each time through the CISO's account. And we finally asked the CISO, why did you approve it? Because it literally said Russia. It was Russia and Ukraine was the location of the logins. And the CISO in frustration said, listen, I was just told that when I got this message to hit approve. And I thought, well, what happened there, right? Like, either you as a system admin, can you imagine you're updating everybody from passwords to push-based authentication? You're just trying to roll it out, and you're like, okay, we're trying to stop hacking. And so when you go to log in, you got to say approve. Did they even mention that, hey, if it's not you logging in, don't approve it? You should say deny and then report it to IT. Or did they assume the person would have the understanding of the process to know that's what it meant And then, or was it said and they didn't hear it? Or, another story I heard was, this person, they were trying to deploy push-based MFA to 1,000 oil rig workers. And a lot of the oil rig workers didn't have smartphones to be able to send these messages to them. So they had to buy them smartphones and teach them how to use them. And then it turned out a lot of those oil workers changed the phone number on the MFA. They could control what phone number the MFA went to, and they changed it to be their boss. And their boss was approving everybody's login every day, all day long. And of course, that person had no idea whether people were really logging in. And they asked that supervisor, "Why are you doing that? You shouldn't do that. You're setting yourself up to be compromised, and you stop that." So they stopped it. Well, they went back and they checked. 2 months later, he started it again. He's like, "Listen, my guys just need to do their job, right? Computers." So to answer your question, it's going to take a combination of policies, technical controls, and education. And sometimes it's just a little bit of education, to tell someone, hey, if you're not logging in, don't hit approve. So it's going to take all of these things until we get better technical controls. And let me say, it all comes down to, we need to upgrade the internet to stop crime. People commit crime because they can't get caught. If we change the internet so you couldn't commit crime without being caught, and this is not a technical issue. I solved it 20 years ago. I got a paper called Fix the Internet. I can send it to anybody now. I know how to fix the internet. It's not a technical issue. It's a political issue because, believe it or not, when you secure the internet so that nobody can use it to commit crime without being identified, there are lots of people all over the spectrum that don't like that. There are privacy advocates that don't want to be identified. They want complete 100% anonymity. I understand it. And then there is the entire world of law enforcement and governments that kind of like that it's easy to hack people. That's how they identify and arrest and wiretap and stingray people. Like, if you don't know why our cell phones are so insecure, the SMS messages and the voice calls, and you can fake being anybody, a big part of it is because our intelligence agencies and law enforcement want it that way. So you have these two diametrically opposed groups, the total anonymity people and law enforcement and governments. And let me say, many governments, like here, at least we have this thin veil of you have some privacy, but in China and India and stuff, like, it's outright, we're going to spy on you. But you have these big groups that don't want it to be more secure, because if I secure it against hackers, I secure it against law enforcement and world governments. So it's not a technical problem. It's a political problem.
I mean, the Clipper chip was, that could have fixed everything.
Dear Lord God.
Boy.
Good Lord. I thought I had one more thing.
What was that you were saying, Paul? What?
Yes.
Missy.
I had something on ransomware. One thing I have been seeing on ransomware, so I want to address this point, Roger, then I want to ask you the 5 questions about Security Weekly, where the folks like in government seem to be getting more serious about viewing ransomware and cyber criminals as real threats that command a physical attack, physical retaliation, taking a more proactive stance in doing this. Do you think this is something that can work with ransomware? And are you following what's happening in various countries where they're really trying to go after cyber criminals more than before, largely because of ransomware attacks?
It could. I mean, that's the big fear, too, is that a digital cyber warfare could lead to a kinetic, bloody battle. I mean, if you think about what we did with Stuxnet, right? That's the United States and Israel that took out nuclear centrifuges in Iran. Can you imagine if Iran had come into America and digitally disabled our nuclear capabilities? That would be real war. There would be real.
Well, it's not possible because our nuclear capabilities are stuck in the 50s for just that reason.
That's right. Good luck trying to find CPM viruses.
Yeah.
But I mean, so yeah, I think there is a coming. We're coming to this reckoning. Like, we've always worried about digital warfare, and this year was like the year of ransomware. The year of MFA taking over, and the year of nation state attacks. It's, SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange hacks are huge. Tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of companies were compromised by Russian nation state. And Russia right now, as an example, Microsoft said Russia is responsible for 58% of reported crime. 58%, followed by Iran, not China. I always thought it would be number two would be China, but in the Microsoft report, it was Iran, then China.
You missed the part where it said reported crime. China doesn't get caught. We don't catch the good criminals.
Right.
Well, and let me say, we don't get caught, right?
Except for that once.
Our the NSA's in and out most of the time, unless they have like a Edward Snowden leak
it was
or something.
more Israel. We'll talk about how Israel.
Yeah,
in the news.
Yeah. But so I would say that, there is going to be probably physical things, and I heard that Iran's gasoline stations were taken out, and is it internal? Was it an external thing that caused this physical, all the gasoline stations cards being down and that sort of stuff? The biggest fear is that in any Cold War that somebody will make a mistake and the response will be overly aggressive because of that mistake. Like, I forget the book, but there's a book saying that we're 5 times close to the brink of nuclear war because our sensors thought somebody else was attacking us. We've dropped atomic bombs out of airplanes and they've fallen off of trains and stuff like that. But there's been 5 cases where we very close came to setting off nuclear bombs and setting off a nuclear war. And only if you believe the stories and the narratives, it was only, because of some small thing.
One of those is when some kid hacked the Whopper, but
that's right. Do you want to play a game? But I mean, that's the fear right now, where all this digital warfare is going on. If Russia was to come take out our fuel industry really in a really bad way, not just the Colonial Pipeline, which didn't even really touch the pipeline, but if somebody really aggressively attacks one of our major industries, the food supplier, because they were attacking a grain supplier consortium, if they actually cause significant disruption, I think it's going to be difficult for somebody's defensive capabilities not to attack at either a cyber capability or even physically. It's going to be that's their Cold Wars don't always stay cold.
Roger, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Yes.
3 words to describe yourself.
Can Roger only do 3 words?
Just 3.
Hardworking bulldozer.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Ice.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
1 IQ point above average.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
It might be War Games. That's a great one. Yes. Or Sneakers. Somewhere in there. I don't know. They're all kind of horrible, right? I mean, most of them, I spend my time going, that's like, I love the password ones where they break in with the passwords and they're like, okay, guess this password. And apparently if you have a gun at your head, you're better at guessing the passwords. And then they're trying a bunch and then boom, they're through. And I'm like, that's not at all how password guessing works. Although one time I once broke into a system outright on my first guess, the admin password, and I went, I don't know, Rosebud, because I'd watched Citizen Kane that week and I put in Rosebud, which is a major word in that film, and it worked and got me through. So in my 34-year career, it's never happened again, but it did happen one time.
Roger, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh, wow. Jessica Alba and George Clooney.
Very nice. Roger, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Thank you. But what a blast. I can't believe I didn't say Albert Einstein.
Next time. Coming up next, Matt Linton from Google. Stick around. Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly InfoSec World 2021. It's proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Security Weekly listeners save 20% on your digital pass as this is a virtual event. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021. With us for this segment is Matt Linton. Matt cut his technical teeth in the MUDs and IRC dens of the 90s while daylighting in search and rescue. Matt joins us to discuss the term incident commander. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you.
Nice to have you, Matt. As with all new guests on the show, I always like to ask, how did you get your start in information security?
How I got my start in InfoSec? Well, I was kind of hanging out on a MUD and in some IRC rooms with friends when I was in high school and college. And I was on a career path towards full-time disaster management. So I was working as an EMT and a firefighter and doing rescue stuff. And then right around 2000 in the .com times, I was going through a little bit of burnout at the same time as a bunch of people I knew were forming a startup in the Bay Area. And they had a problem, which was their lead senior network architect was having a hard time finding an assistant who would stick around. They got desperate and they made me a deal. And they said, you move to the Bay Area and agree to stick around and we'll teach you all the things you need to know to be a Unix administrator. And I was like, you know what? I need a change of scenery. I will take this deal. And I moved out here to join a .com, got laid off a month and a half later.
How much Unix did you learn in a month and a half?
I did not learn a lot of Unix in a month and a half. I learned enough to know that when you're reorganizing a network cabinet and you go in on a Saturday and you think, I'll just unplug all the ones that don't have a light lit, that's a really stupid idea, and you will spend all day Monday fixing it.
Been there.
And you also learn that RM-space-RF / removes the French language pack, so your system runs faster.
Of course,
yes, of course.
And init 0 makes all the processes run at level 0.
It does.
So I fell from there into a junior Unix admin gig at a research lab. We had a mutual agreement in that they didn't have a lot of money, and I was willing to work for almost nothing to get the experience. And then
great kind of agreement.
I spent years there. I learned Unix sysadmining, and I got more and more into kind of how systems work. And then from there, InfoSec started to become a professionalized thing. And there's this confluence wherein my interest in protecting people kind of from the disaster management and EMS side of my life ran into the ability to protect people from an InfoSec side. And I ended up moving into information security, taking some enthralling SANS courses from Ed Scotus, and those
me as well. Yeah.
Really catalyzed me to just wanting to focus on security.
So Matt, were you always a part-time EMS? Like, when did that enter the picture?
So I was full-time EMS and fire for about the first 6 years I had jobs. And then when I cut over to doing information security and system administration, I was at a big government research lab, and they had enough weird stuff around. So I was at the NASA Ames Research Center, and they had enough dangerous stuff around there that they actually had their own on-site disaster crew. And since I still had valid medical and emergency certs, they let me join the disaster crew part-time just to kind of keep my hand in it while I was working on the technical stuff.
Wait, what kind of disasters were you preparing for at that facility?
Well, so for example, that facility has a 40-foot by 80-foot wind tunnel that moves wind at about 180 knots and draws 45 megawatts of power when you turn it on.
Wow.
They have a kiln that reaches thousands of degrees Celsius and uses 60 megawatts. Confined spaces, toxic gases, toxic metals. It turns out research at NASA can be pretty dangerous.
Did anyone get hurt while you were there? Do you have emergencies to respond to?
Well, I would say those things are probably someone else's medical record, and I shouldn't go into it too much.
Safe answer.
Any sanitized examples that you can give of maybe not involving people but equipment? We always like to hear about stuff blowing up, Matt, right?
Yeah, I mean, they blow up a lot of stuff on purpose there too. I'm trying to think of equipment, but we did have to remove somebody from between the fan blades of a wind tunnel once. They weren't trapped or injured or anything. They just needed to be gotten through.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
don't turn it on.
Don't turn it on.
Yeah, and then from there, that's what lockout tagout is for, right? You got somebody in the wind tunnel blade, lockout tagout. All the industrial control people know what I'm talking about right now.
Hell yeah.
And then because they were a federal agency, they cross-loaned me to FEMA rescue teams, which was really where I got a lot of chance to see kind of big disaster management happen.
Were you on site with FEMA and at other kinds of disaster sites, or just training with them?
Yeah, no. So we trained a lot, but we would also deploy to hurricanes, especially after Katrina.
I was going to say Katrina was a big
now.
One, right? Yeah.
So we pre-deployed to hurricane zones. I got to do a little bit of building search and rescue for hurricanes and the like. I was fortunate enough that California did not have any large earthquakes in the time I was with that team.
How do you see incident response and disaster recovery starting to evolve and change? Like, what are some of the things that we need to be expecting and kind of catalyzing ourselves to take on?
So one of the commonalities that I see a lot of is, in EMS and rescue and fire, people expect an awful lot of you, right? No matter how well you did putting out a fire, no matter how well you did controlling a hazmat situation, there's always something you could have done better. And there's always somebody there to point it out. So in InfoSec too, especially in incident response, I see that, as an industry, we're maturing. We're not nearly as mature as disaster rescue services are. And as we mature, people are starting to expect more from us. They don't just want us to catch the hacker and kick them out. They want us to catch the hacker and kick them out and let them know what happened and let them know what we're going to do better next time and prevent it from happening next time. And there's sort of these stacked expectations. If you look at relatively recent regulations like GDPR, if you have a attack that potentially could touch user data, you're not expected to just fix the hack. You're expected to fix it and then tell people it occurred. Tell them if they have anything to worry about. Help make them whole again if you can. And so we need to mature kind of similarly to how fire and rescue needed to mature, because the expectations keep growing.
And Matt, how did you doing the physical incident response? Did you end up working in incident response? I think where we last left off in your story, you were working for a large government lab and entity. So what happened from there?
So at some point, I found out that actual DFIR incident response was a career path I could go down, and I really got interested in that. And I started doing kind of that small scale forensics and incident response you do when you have a little network and not very much money. You detect a thing or somebody tells you a thing happened. You investigate it, and kind of you have to do all the things. You are the forensic analyst, the incident responder. You write up the report after. You have a really small team doing a lot of things.
And then you're the hero.
You get to be the hero. That's my favorite thing about incident response is I didn't break it. Right.
Right.
So
I'm not the sysadmin where if I break it, I have to do the incident response and fix it. You're absolutely right.
Right. I like professional incident response because no matter how bad things are right now, it's at least not my fault they're that bad, and I'm there to fix it. So from there, I got into the incident response team at NASA Ames. I continued working on kind of larger and more complex issues. And as NASA grew and professionalized, we started working across centers. So there's 14-ish field centers at NASA, depending on the wind. And we needed to collaborate with each other because the network was connected and the incident response teams needed to be connected too. And that's when I started trying to bring some of the lessons of incident command from the rescue world, where you have lots of different teams who on a large incident need to interact with each other well, even if they've never met before, and DFIR, where the same thing can kind of happen in a larger scale incident. And after I'd been doing that for a few years, I kind of got reached out to by Google, and they made me an offer that I would have been an insane person to refuse. And they gave me the ability to work full-time on large scale incident response challenges. So that's where I am today.
Because Google, right?
It turns out even small scale is large scale at Google.
Exactly.
What I've heard about some of the things at Google, Matt, is the tooling and the processes are very specific to Google. And if that's true, was that like a big adjustment for you?
Yeah, in some ways the tooling and the processes are very Google specific, but in other ways they're really not. And I guess I can clarify to that by saying a lot of the environment at Google, was very custom when I got there. But as Google itself moves more towards, cloud solutions for things and building their own things in cloud, a lot of the things that we build these days, like, DF Time Wolf and Turbinia and Time Sketch, they're kind of things that we use in GCE and other people might use in GCE too. So I think the skills are starting to expand to be really useful outside of Google too.
Well, yeah, and that's the Amazon model too, right? I'm building this cloud to support Amazon, but I'm also going to commoditize it for the rest of the world.
Yeah. But especially in the people parts, because where the biggest challenge in incident response lies, at least in my perspective, it's always in the people parts. And people, are relatively similar across all kinds of companies, across all kinds of places, all kinds of countries. And the challenges in command, control, and communication when you're getting into leading a really potentially expansive thing, those are skills that I think translate everywhere. They translate lots of places and even across domains.
Because you know the personas. Can we talk about that? Because you hate to call them stereotypes, but I have to imagine that working as much in like full incident response as you are, Matt, you are hyper aware of those different personas and different types. And again, I don't want to stereotype people, but I think people kind of fall into general buckets when especially there's an incident or an emergency that happens and people tend to communicate and or behave in certain ways. And how you deal with that is probably stuff you've thought about, right?
Absolutely. So the three core skills, we call them the 3 C's of large incident management: command, control, and communications. Mm-hmm. The history of the 3 C's goes all the way back to the 1970s when California CDF had a program called Firescope to try to make emergency management better. And they did postmortems on all these kinds of disasters: forest fires, big car wrecks, airplane crashes. And they were trying to get to the root of what are the things that are always going wrong and how can we fix them? And the human factors that they found were going wrong time and time after again were command, control, and communications. Command being, is someone in charge and does everyone know who's in charge? Mm-hmm. Control being, is the person who's in charge actively managing the incident, actively controlling it, which means thinking a few steps ahead, knowing what the plan is, knowing what the objectives are. And then the biggest part, as always, is communications. And you nailed it right there when you said, the different styles of people have different styles of communicating. I think a lot of the fun I have in incident management challenges is, especially at Google, the thing I love is nobody's reluctant to help, right? If you have an incident, if you need things, I've never asked somebody for help I needed from them and had them come back and say, not my job. But I have had to communicate in different ways to different people and learn kind of this skill of over communicating when you're in an incident to the extent that everybody is 100% sure what you mean and what they're supposed to be doing. And that takes a lot of getting used to.
Because I can see it almost, like a double-edged sword, Matt, where people that don't want to communicate are on one end of the spectrum and people that over-communicate on the other end of the spectrum. And like both ends of that spectrum are really bad when you're responding to an incident.
Yes. Yeah. And they each need their own nudges, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes the under-communicators need to be encouraged to really come out and be a little bit more communicative during an incident. Sometimes the over-communicators need a little bit of direction too, helping them focus in on what's critical. As a good incident manager, you're actively managing that. You're telling people, hey, I really love what you have to say, but the objective in this sync is X. We need to stick to that objective. And for the people you're not hearing from, you're kind of calling them out like, what do you think, Gary? What is your opinion on this? Mm-hmm. But all of the while, you're kind of having to project a command presence where somebody needs to know what we're doing, and that's you, and you need to direct it.
So you need to be a people person first and foremost.
I think you do need a good amount of people skills to do kind of larger scale incident management. Yeah. And I think in the fire service too, by the time you're battalion chief or you're somebody who's going to be called upon to be incident commander of, 500, 1,000 people, you've had to have gotten pretty good at understanding people and what drives them and knowing how to communicate with them.
In knowing how to your earlier point them in the right direction, give them focus and purpose. And in an incident, time is of the essence. And I'd imagine that being able to identify what someone's good at and not good at very quickly is a huge, huge skill in your favor.
The other thing too is I like to remind people, you got to tell people the why. Googlers are very helpful. They want to help. They will do whatever it is you need them to do for an incident. But a lot of the times they're smarter than you, right? Most of the people that I work with are smarter than me. And in their area of expertise, if I tell them, go do this thing for me, they'll go do it. But if I tell them, I'm worried the attacker is going to do this, and I think if we do this protective measure, it'll stop them. Can you do that? Then they'll give me the yes, I can, but also have you considered piece. And again, that's a part of having a strong command and control is making sure that you're telling people what you need, but carving the space out for them to advise you because they're experts and their job
drawing
is
on their expertise is awesome. That's a lot of wisdom right there, Matt. That's very good advice.
Yeah.
What about scaling? I mean, I can imagine this in a small setting, but you're at a ginormous company. How does incident command scale down so that you're not having everybody in charge who's not in reach?
That's a great question. That is why we've based Google's incident management procedures off of this thing called ICS, the Incident Command System. And if you've seen the term incident commander, because I'm on Twitter, I see like Scott Roberts from GitHub tweet, and he'll use the term incident commander, and it's kind of becoming a popular term in our industry. ICS, the Incident Command System, is the system that was designed by professional rescuers that came out of the FireScope program and into the National Incident Management Framework. And it's a way to build a team that is perfectly suited for incident management and grows along with the incident. And that is kind of how incidents go. You have a lead, you have a small team of people looking into the lead, and then the lead runs somewhere and you realize you need more people or you need more analysis. And then things can grow from there. And if they grow to a large scale, you might end up needing lots of people. During Spectre and Meltdown, the size of the team working on that problem was around 300 core people on the team. And what happens is exactly the same way it works in fire and rescue. The first truck on the scene, they get out, they know it's a big thing, they haven't assessed yet. The ranking officer on the truck is the incident commander, and they're the incident commander until somebody more senior arrives and takes over. Then they're the incident commander until somebody more senior arrives to take over. And the rule of thumb for all of those more senior people arriving is take over only if you need to. Let the current incident commander keep going if they're doing a good job. And we've put in place this program called IMAG, Incident Management at Google, where we train everybody, ideally everyone who is an on-call person for any service, how to do that, how to be the incident commander, how to delegate, how to grow, and how to hand it over. And so this lets us scale the team, because an incident commander will put in place an operations lead. An operations lead has a known role, everyone knows what they do, and they can delegate further down. So if you imagine a giant network outage, you might have an incident commander for the outage, a operations lead for the technical teams, and then you might have a, let's just say, BGP team under the operations lead, and you might have a WAN team and a LAN team. You might end up with a logistics team helping out. And it's designed so that you can scale it as large as you want, but each person in the response reports upward only to one person above them. And that's the person from whom they take direction and give status reports. So you don't end up with people running around solving the same problem twice, pulling the same data twice, not knowing what they're really working on.
Matt,
so how do
I just want to address kind of the elephant in the room. Matt, you say as much or as little as you want about this, but those of us from the outside looking in at Google have read reports of Google employees being unhappy in your role with having to work with Google employees from across the organization at an incident. Has that been a challenge? Are these, in your mind, like just isolated incidents? I know at one time they were talking about walkouts. There are Google employees not happy about supporting efforts in China and things like that. Does that make your job more difficult? Or, I mean, you can say no comment. Like, I totally respect that.
Well, I came prior to Google from the U.S. government, and I think you would probably guess that there are vast differences of opinion even within the U.S. government about what the government should or shouldn't be doing. Where I focus things on is my team is there to protect user data, and we're there to protect the users. And so part of my job is ensuring that everyone I work with knows I am here to make things better and protect people. And when I call upon you for help during an incident, regardless of what else might be going on in your life and regardless of how you feel about your employment at the time, I need your help to protect people. And this is what is happening, and this is what we are going to do.
To use a phrase, Matt fights for the users.
Fight for the user. So
well done.
My team
Matt, nothing
specifically doesn't really have a lot of pushback on incidents.
Well, I mean, regardless of what's going on, an incident, there's nothing like an incident to help bring people together. I've often found that, and I don't know if you experience this too. Like after an incident and the dust settles, you feel kind of more of a bond, not just with each other, but to the company as well, because you all just kind of work to help recover from this incident.
And oftentimes a community is at its strongest after a disaster.
Yeah.
Because 90% plus of rescues done after an earthquake or a flood or a disaster are self-rescue by other members of the community. And then afterward, there's a bond from rebuilding. There's a bond from people who pulled each other out of harm's way, et cetera. And I think, again, that's one place where there's a lot of parallels between disaster management and chaos management.
So I'm thinking about this, that what your model is very straightforward, but I'm thinking, is that gonna fit for most IT folks, or if you had to do a lot of training and education to help people learn a good way to this incident command approach, and internalize it?
Yeah, some of the fundamental pieces of this are actually pretty counterintuitive to people, right? For the example, the idea that you should over-communicate during an emergency, or the idea that we're going to form a very rigid organizational tree and somehow that's going to make the incident response more flexible. So we have a training course inside of Google, the IMAG training, and it's listed in the on-call kind of going on-call guide that before you pick up a pager and you're on call for a service, you should go through IMAG training. We have a group of about 30 or 40 pretty senior people who have been extensively trained and have experience in managing incidents. And then collectively, we've trained more than 5,000 other Googlers at this point on the basics of how to respond to an emergency and be the incident commander and lead a team.
Wait, now hold on, Matt. Did you say pick up a pager? Do you guys still have pagers?
Figuratively speaking,
it's a figure of speech. I gotcha.
You caught me showing my age with the old Motorola's.
I was gonna say, man, I gotta go get some POC/SAG sniffing going on.
I'm curious from a smaller scale standpoint, how are you doing, or how would you foresee this not burning out your upper level echelon of very, very experienced, very senior people trying to also mentor kind of the next generation? You got that training going on. One of the hard things for mentoring is it's really hard to scale because you've got that one guy that knows all the things, that has to do all the things, and you're still trying to train people and you're trying to mentor and bring people up, but that also requires them to undercommit to other things. So how do you scale that back where you don't have a big crew, and then obviously you've scaled that up so it works in a larger scale environment?
Yeah, so similarly to how kind of it works in the fire service, right? You can practice ICS on a small scale event. If you have a car that hit a bus in an intersection, there's enough people involved that you can practice ICS and set up incident command and have an ops lead and kind of practice it at a small scale before you get to the point where you need to be in charge of a levee breaking and flooding a whole town, right? So similarly, you can practice IMAG on smaller incidents, and we do. As long as it's not too much structure that it gets in the way of handling whatever's going on, we practice it that way. The other thing we do is we like to, every once in a while, respond to our red teamers as though they're attackers and just incident manage the heck out of the red team. Kind of keeps us on our toes, and it gives us a chance to put newer people in the pilot seat with a more experienced person kind of riding shotgun and keeping an eye and giving tips.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, are there, in addition to process, did you talk about tools already that you've developed at Google, and are some of those open source, or are there specialized tools?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, the tooling supports the process, right? And it supports the people. And because of the scale we do have tooling that we've written and open sourced. I think you're probably familiar with Plazo, formerly Log to Timeline, which is a tool that rips. You can give it a disk image, and it rips the disk image apart, looks for everything that looks like a log file, and then creates an ordered timeline out of the log file. We have another tool called Time Sketch that can then take a lot of timelines from a bunch of different systems, and then it funnels them all into an Elasticsearch-backed indexable, searchable database. And the way we use Time Sketch is if you have 50 or 100 or 150 hosts that you're trying to do forensics on, all of you can do forensics on all of the hosts at the same time by looking through the log lines via Time Sketch and then annotating interesting looking log lines as you find them. So if one person's looking for malware execution, another's looking for suspicious logins, and another person's looking for, weird cron jobs being installed. Collectively, as those three analysts are annotating events, Time Sketch is building a meta timeline that shows you, login occurred, malware was executed, cron job was established, login occurred to another system. And then it will graph for you in the order in which the events occurred, visually, how things happened, how they played out during the incident.
Oh my God.
And that's one of the ways that we're able to amplify forensic analysts across a larger number of machines than we have analysts, instead of just sitting there one disk image at a time, poking around.
That's awesome.
If I recall, Matt, you used to do a lot with, physical access, physical pen testing, physical whatever. Is physical still a thing you have to worry about? Like, are there use cases where you've got to be able to crash the gate? Are we all being able to do things? Go ahead.
Yeah, I've never had to crash the gate at Google. And I think that's part of this is, I grew into the role I'm in now from, a research and development lab where you were really called upon to wear a lot of hats. I honestly think that's a great way to get into InfoSec, is being in a place where you get to try on a lot of hats and get a lot of skills out of it. And then I specialized, right? Because that is the course I have taken, was to wear a lot of hats, find my niche, and then really specialize. And so at Google, I haven't had the chance to do much physical pen testing work for my employment in the last 7 years, but I've had a really great opportunity to zero in on some very hard problems and be able to solve and scale them. Those physical pen test days were fun, though.
Oh, yeah.
They make for great stories. Which I always found
remember.
Go ahead, Matt.
At least once I remember balcony climbing the Rio Hotel in a toga at DEF CON, though.
Was that just part of a party, or was that part of a physical pen test, or both?
I wanted to get into the Caesars Challenge party, and I found a vacant room 2 floors up from Caesars Challenge, but aligned with their balcony. And so I rappelled down to their balcony and then was able to get in through the back door. But then, like 10 minutes later, I realized I had to go to the bathroom, and I didn't know the password still, so I had to spend the next 10 minutes trying to social engineer people who were already in the party to tell me what the password was so I could get back in.
While trying not to pee your pants.
While trying not to pee my toga, yeah.
Not pants, toga.
Right, my bad.
Oh. One of the questions from Discord is Foremost part of the disk log extractor?
What's that?
Is Foremost part of the disk log extractor?
I don't know that it's integrated into it, but it can take output from lots of different tools.
Okay.
Cool.
I think he's talking about Plazo there, right? Or he or she?
Probably. I was just reading it from the Discord chat.
Yeah, it's fully open sourced, so if somebody wants to submit a module.
There you go. The reason I was asking about physical, I was thinking about some of the new BGP mess-ups where there are cases where they've got to get in there and physically access the routers. And, of course, the stories about, the access control system was also offline because of the BGP error.
Yeah, if putting my firefighter hat back on, right? There are very few places fire and rescue can't get if you're willing to destroy some stuff along the way, up to and including bank vaults, because you know, a toddler gets locked in a bank vault, who they're going to call? It turns out our search and rescue team is who they'll call. So, you know, I have a Halligan bar. I'm pretty sure that would have gotten me into a data center rack if I needed to.
Absolutely.
It hasn't been a problem so far.
Matt, obviously you've benefited from your EMS background and physical incident response background. For those that want to get into incident response and forensics, what are your recommendations?
For getting into incident response and forensics. So one thing, especially for forensics, one thing I think we undervalue a lot in InfoSec is system administrators and people who have worked the help desk. And the reason I say that is I feel like a lot of the base of knowledge that I draw upon to make informed decisions as an incident responder, or even to know what the heck is going on as a forensic analyst, those base skills all come from knowing how a system is supposed to work and being able to understand why it's not working the way it's supposed to work. And then a lot of the skills I draw upon to have the people skills necessary to be an incident commander, they come from having been a sysadmin and having to have a customer service mindset while I debug complicated things with people. And so I guess I would start off the bat by saying, do not undervalue system administration time, and then pivoting into InfoSec from there. Another piece of advice I often give people who say they're looking for something they can do without having to be employed first, and you guys are going to rake me over the coals for this, but run your own mail server. Like on bare metal, put some bare metal in a colo, get a mail server going, configure IMAP for yourself, configure DMARC. By the time you're done and you have a mail server that works properly, if you're still sane, you're going to have run through about 86 different RFCs, and you will know how they work. You'll know how SMTP and SendMail, and you'll know how DKIM works and DMARC and SPF.
Wait, are you suggesting folks stand up their own SendMail server, like on Unix or Linux? Let's get into some specifics here, Matt.
Well, I love Postfix on Linux personally, or FreeBSD, but whatever platform you want to be an expert in, you know, if you want to be an Exchange expert, set yourself up an Exchange server.
I've done both. I've done Exchange and Postfix on BSD.
You've done Exchange on BSD?
No, I've done Exchange. I've done Exchange.
You ported Exchange to BSD, Larry? That's amazing.
No. Oh, hell no.
I ate this brownie at a party, and suddenly my FreeBSD server had Exchange on it.
I know. Matt, I think we were at the same party.
Oh, shit. And you were both wearing togas. It was amazing.
I didn't have to pee, though.
But yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, that's something that's something a newbie can do, and it's something they can afford to do, right? And that's important.
In bonus, you've got your own mail server.
Yeah, and you can host it for any domain you want.
Which is funny because most of us older curmudgeon people are like, I set up a mail server in my day, and I don't want to ever do that shit again.
But I still maintain my own, because even as I get into management and even as I'm leading teams instead of getting my hands on the keyboard, I want to maintain the technical credibility in InfoSec to know I know what I'm talking about.
I agree.
And I find that forcing myself to maintain my own mail server keeps me there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think but I think that's great advice, Matt, and I would have the same advice. You need to maintain something of your own in a technical sense, right? Maintain your own GitHub repository, maintain your own service and server, and not just like, I think what we can probably agree on is not just stuff in your lab, but maintain something real that people use and rely on, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, the reason why I specifically tell people run your own mail server is so that I can say, and use that as your daily email. And the reason for that is when you are 6 hours into debugging some terribly frustrated thing in your lab and you're ready to quit, you just turn the lab off and you come back to it maybe a week later.
Yep.
When you're 6 hours into figuring out why your darn email won't work, you've got to keep going if you want to get email. And that moment right there where you've got to get going if you want to get email, that's the moment where you're going to take shortcuts. And those are the shortcuts that are kind of come back and bite you 6 months later and get you your first forensic experience.
Yeah, which is exactly the same mistakes that many seasoned administrators do. Like, shit, it's broken, it's not working, make it work. And 6
and
months
that
later,
will teach you as an incident responder what to look for when you go into an org. You know where the bodies are buried because you've buried the same bodies in the same places.
But that's great advice. But that's great advice when it comes to software too. In some of the experiences I'm grateful for maintaining our own software, writing our own software, was I did crap like that. And I was like, oh, now I know what to look for. Now I know what to talk to people about, because like I was under the gun and had to make those hard decisions and introduced heinous vulnerabilities, and then was like, oh, gotta fix that.
And definitely for doing it as a side project, but even more so if you're an InfoSec person who has done system administration time, I think it will make you a more compassionate incident responder.
Agreed.
Because you are a lot less likely to just callously mock somebody who got owned. If you know
yes.
for sure you could have gotten pwned the same way.
I have so much empathy for software developers having done software for a product that other people use, right? Because again, it's different maintaining a little bit of software for yourself, but maintaining something people use on a daily basis, and at one time I was the primary developer, totally different story. Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent.
PCI.
Encryption.
No, not even PCI. Although we could. Who's your QSA? No, I'm just kidding. You have an interesting usage of the term InfoSec, and I am curious as to how you define InfoSec. No right or wrong answers. I'm just curious. Well, you said something early on when you were talking about your history. You did this, that, and the other, and then InfoSec was becoming a thing. So, how do you define InfoSec in this context?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever asked myself what my definition of InfoSec is. I think it's a broad umbrella that describes people who are trying to keep things working the way they're supposed to work. And so I think InfoSec, it includes system admins. It includes, all kinds of people who really are just trying to make a thing work the way it's supposed to work and stay that way and be dependable.
Fair enough. Was it last week on the show, gentlemen, we were talking about InfoSec versus Cybersec? Or was that on my show? I forget.
I think that was on your show, Jeff.
I think it was on my show. The definition. So compare and contrast InfoSec versus cybersecurity. Are they synonymous, or do you see them as different?
That's another really good question. I think it's the same thing by many names, right? We have information security, we have cybersecurity, we have whatever the flavor of the day is. And I think it all just kind of comes back to people who have an interest in keeping things working properly and protecting whatever it is that's in it. I also see this, there's always this drama online between the hacker community and the, what do they call it? The corporate information security, and the people throwing shade back and forth at each other. I don't see any really reason why we need to have that. I think we all have pretty aligned interests for the most part.
Right. Matt, since you work at Google, I have to ask you, because there's a website dedicated to tracking the projects that Google has killed. And I'm not poking fun at Google. Sometimes I'm disappointed because it's a product I really liked and I used to use, but they killed it. Can you give us any insights into that? Is that related to a security thing, or is that just because Google's putting out so many products that naturally some of those ones aren't going to make it? Is it highly innovative? What's your take on that?
I think Google finds strength in being an evolutionary company, which means instead of having like one person, like Apple has the Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs has the vision, and all the way down to the lowest desk in the company, you're doing what Steve wants. I think Google kind of prides itself on being the kind of company that lets evolution do its thing. And if you, as an engineer, you have a good idea for something, you can go ahead and start prototyping and implementing it and trying it out. And because it is so large and there are so many people, right? Evolution has produced many animals that look alike from common trees. I think it's fairly similar at Google that you'll end up with many products that are similar because many different people had good ideas and they rolled with them and they wanted to see which idea will succeed best. I think that's been really powerful for Google in a lot of ways. One of the ways it has been unfortunate for the company seems to be a lot of those ideas people came up with were chat apps.
Yeah.
My favorite ever
but
Google
I mean,
product,
some of them were Angular, and Angular wasn't bad.
Python's pretty good too.
Right.
My favorite product was actually Google Contributor. You could select an amount of money monthly that you would agree to pay to website owners, and then up to your budget, when you visited a website that was a partner in Google Contributor,
I remember that.
instead of showing you an ad, they would like take a penny and show you a cat picture.
I thought that was a great idea too.
And the cats were literally really all Googlers' cats. We had a queue where we could upload our own cat. Right? And so you could occasionally see your own cat on ads. That was the best. I'm so disappointed it's gone.
That's cool.
Right.
I'd pay for that model.
I, in fact, tried to get my parrot uploaded, and they were like, no, it's just cats.
It's just cats.
Yeah.
Could a cat be eating the parrot, or could the parrot be eating a cat?
I was going to say, if I put my bird up against a cat, I think the cat might potentially lose.
Whatever. I think, Matt, you're a bird person, aren't you?
But I mean, I mean, let's give Google credit. I mean, you came up with Kubernetes, and that really took off as well. So I mean, having that highly innovative culture and putting things out there is, I think, important.
And Gmail's finally out of beta.
I think evolution is messy but effective.
Yeah.
So I wanted to plus up your suggestion on running a mail server, and that is, if you really want to get some skin in the game, put your spouse or family on that mail server as well.
Yeah. Now you got users to support, right? Agreed.
Yeah. And then if you want to give them webmail because you know they're going to want it, now you got to maintain a web server too.
And you got a lot of attack surface to cover.
Yeah.
Even better, host it on WordPress.
Install WordPress. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I always go back to that because no matter what your economic situation, it is relatively affordable to, fire up something even just in AWS or GCE and put $5 or $10 a month toward running your own infra. And the learning payoff for that is huge.
Yep, absolutely.
No, completely agree.
Absolutely.
So where do you see growth now? What's in front of you? What hill do you want to climb next?
Well, I think there's so much maturity still to come in incident management. People want more from us all the time. They now want to know in shorter time frames what we think might have happened, where they may be affected, maybe not. There's still so many more procedures and tools that need to be built and need to be learned, and things we need to do to get to be where we're really truly serving what people need from us as incident responders. I think I'm going to continue to grow in that area. As a personal area of growth, I recently became a manager, and now I'm effecting these sorts of changes through others, through team building, and that's a personal hill that I'm climbing. It turns out managing is really hard.
Yeah, we heard that from our previous guest too, and I think there's some folks that want to stay technical and be on that technical track, and others that want to
Technically,
transition.
he didn't say it was hard. He said he sucked at it.
Yes. No, it's a great point. Good point, Jeff. But what's that transition been like, Matt, for you? Is that something that you welcomed? Is that something you made a conscious decision of? Like, what was that process like?
It came for me. I have always intended on remaining a technical contributor only. I've always valued being the fixer that you send in to fix a problem. And that's been my role for, 25 years in rescue and in tech.
Right.
And then it slowly came to be that I was focusing more and more of my time on the smooth operation of the people around me and making sure they were happy and making sure they had good morale, and noticing that there were areas where we might need to train differently and kind of trying to get the team to train differently. And it finally occurred during a discussion with my manager when they told me, all the things you've been doing in the last quarter are really wonderful things on a different ladder. And I had wandered my way into managing by becoming more concerned about the team than I was about the specific technical stuff I was on. And then I just decided to roll with it. I mean, I found myself there. I might as well keep going and see where that leads.
That's awesome. Matt, I got a weird question for you. I know we've met a number of times in person, and it's clear on this call that your hair is what they might not consider, manager type. And given that you're in Google fairly, progressive company. What's your thought on sort of the alternative look, as it has been termed, through quote corporate America? I mean, like, my retail sales career is effectively over. I mean, I've got visible tattoos and piercings and that type of stuff. But what's your thoughts on going into some place like Google and with having a mohawk and red hair, and like, is this something you should be concerned about, or is it less so nowadays?
Well, I mean, I think you can look at police departments to find your answer to that, right? Visible tattoos used to be completely verboten in police departments, and now you can have full sleeves, right? I think the alternative look, being able to have a pink mohawk, being able to have, fingernail polish on me, it's always been important to me that wherever I'm working, and I had green and purple hair when I worked at NASA too, it's always been important to me that I'm able to be expressive. And I've been privileged enough to work places where that's a thing. I can't say it doesn't matter anymore, because there are probably plenty of companies where they'll look at you askew, or you'll have a harder time being taken seriously as a leader in an incident. Certainly, it is much less an issue at Google than it ever was for me working in rescue and fire services, where people, they're just like, blue hair, why? Why are you doing this? But even at that, I always felt like it helped ground me in knowing that I was achieving because of my achievements, not because I was just fitting in. And in fact, in spite of not fitting in sometimes.
I love that.
I don't know. I might have just gone on a complete tangent and not answered.
Either way, it turned out perfect, and I think that really is a great sort of outlook. In that, I did it because I'm awesome, and I did a great thing, and I tried really hard, as opposed to what I look like or what I smell like, or how many holes I have in my face, type of thing.
Larry actually smells really good tonight. I just want to throw that out there, like being in the same room as Larry, and that's not always the case. I mean, it goes both ways too. I don't always smell really great either. So,
I think some of what we collectively look at as kind of the hacker mythos or the hacker dress, I think a lot of it has its roots back in kind of a common inability for many of us to fit in with crowds when we were younger, and a conscious rejection of trying to fit into crowds anymore. And then we developed our own look, and we found our own crowd, and we found our own people. Now, InfoSec, as you would define it, is a larger tent than that. So we are seeing people for whom the hacker dress just isn't for them, and that's cool. But at the same time, I think we fit in, right, regardless of our dress.
Cool. I think that we've evolved to this point where we haven't put a stereotype on what a hacker should look like. And I also think over time we've all kind of learned from each other in that our styles have kind of mixed, right? Where like someone like me who maybe most of the time, like, I like to dress nice because that's my style, but like I also like to rock a kilt at a con because that's kind of that feels kind of cool. That's kind of like, I like that.
It's liberating and freeing.
Like that's cool too. But I also think some people who may not dress nice.
And I was just talking about your testicles.
Yeah. But I also think some people that maybe not, like maybe want to dress more conservatively might. And like there's been this kind of sharing of styles. I think all kind of like coming together on the fact that like there's no stereotype on what a hacker should look like. Right?
Yeah. And I think we're better off for that, right? I think
Agreed.
When you see somebody at a conference and it's a security-based conference, there's no preconceived notion of what they ought to look like. I like to mindfully remind myself to walk up to everybody, regardless of what they look like, and just say, "Hey, what are you working on?" Not are you in engineer or are you in sales?
Yeah,
right? It's just like, "Hey, what are you working on lately? What are you doing?"
It's so true, and I hope folks coming in this industry hear what we're saying now and understand that too, because I've been in so many situations. One is actually really funny. John Strand, who's one of the greatest hackers that I know, when I first met him, he was in like full suits.
Yep.
Remember that? He was like went through every SANS conference. He was in a full suit, and like some part of me was like, really? Like you're hacking stuff because you don't have like any tattoos or like piercings or mohawks or anything like that. So how could you possibly be a good hacker, right? And then you get talking to John, like, oh, I get it now. Like throw those stereotypes out, out the window.
That was so many years ago. I showed up at an interview at Genuity, which was right after they became Genuity, formerly BBN, for an interview there. And I showed up in a sport coat and tie, and I sat down with the interviewing manager, and she says, "Geez, a tie? I don't think I've ever had anyone wear a tie to an interview ever here. Like, you're going to be an engineer. I expect you to have blue hair and wear a T-shirt and jeans." And I'm like, I kind of like this place.
You should have said, but the original BBN hackers, all the picture I see are white shirts, black ties.
Exactly. But and part of the reason why I ask these types of questions is because I don't have the typical look, and it's and maybe I don't see the same lens that other folks do. I mean, the first time I got a tattoo below my sleeve, it was awesome. It was great for me, and I loved it. But then I stood in front of a SANS class with a long sleeve shirt and taught and pointed at the slides that first time and went, "Oh shit, I should use my other hand." And then I forgot about it, and just it doesn't matter. To me, it didn't matter, and people respected me because I was speaking intelligently, and that type of stuff, and knew what I was talking about because I'd spent years crafting.
I mean, if you really want to go back and talk about what an old school hacker looks like, an old school hacker looks like Grace Hopper. But I also want to go on the record with kilts and say that I think kilts are the perfect middle ground between men who are jealous of women wearing skirts and women who are jealous of men having pockets.
Agreed. Agreed.
So weren't you wearing a kilt at TACFest when we first met?
I was, and mine has pockets.
Mine has pockets too. I will, the tactical kilt, right? Yeah, utility kilt. Yeah,
shit.
Utility kilt. It's the perfect blend of form and function.
I don't think mine has pockets, but I have a sporran, so I'm all set.
Yeah.
So I have a purse, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say though, you guys are spot on. It's really once somebody starts opening their mouth and contributing, it doesn't really matter what the hell they look like. It's not the packaging; it's what they're doing in the message. I think there's a lot more tolerance for that now than there was 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
To look beyond the physical appearance.
Yeah, I do think it took a long time for some of us who we would consider the old school hackers to just kind of shed the trauma from our childhoods and get to the point where maintaining this closed club of people to have our safe space didn't make sense anymore. And thank goodness we are moving beyond that and being a big tent and saying everybody is welcome. You don't have to look any particular way.
It is a cultural thing that we've struggled with, for sure. If you look into hacker history, which I've spent more time than probably someone should looking into hacker history, I truly believe that it is a cultural thing that we have to overcome, and like for good reason, but also there's a lot of good reasons to overcome it, for sure. Matt, I just have 5 questions left for you in there, what we call 5 questions with Security Weekly. So Matt, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I'm ready to play.
3 words to describe yourself.
Reign in chaos.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Ooh, if I were a serial killer, what would be my weapon of choice? Do I have a time limit on answering these?
I mean, within reason. There are no right or wrong answers, and we will not judge you on the air.
I would say inert gases.
Oh. If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Boring but functional?
Matt, what is your favorite hacker movie?
It's tough. I'll have to go with Sneakers.
War Games.
Wow. I'm losing. Jeff and I have this thing where like I want people to say hackers and I earn a point. And when you say Sneakers, Jeff earns a point. So
I mean, Hackers is really great camp, and Sneakers is really great actual, relatively legitimate technique. Ultimately, The Matrix is probably the most enjoyable one.
Interesting. Very well put. Matt, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Lee?
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
And by celebrities, we mean it can be really anyone. Fictional, non-fictional, historical,
Your current parents could be a celebrity in your own mind.
Like, it's literally anyone if you could choose to be your parents.
Lucille Ball and Mr. Rogers.
Old school.
Thank you, neighbor.
Yes. Matt, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
It was really great talking to y'all. Thank you for inviting me.
Stay tuned. The security news is coming up next. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. You can subscribe to all of our shows on the Security Weekly network by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. All of our podcast feeds are there. All new episodes downloaded right to your device. You can join our mailing list, Discord server, follow us on all of our social media and streaming platforms, all on securityweekly.com/subscribe. Don't forget to join our next webcast on November 4th. To learn about pragmatic steps to reduce your software supply chain risk with fine folks at GitLab. On November 11th, learn the key insights and takeaways from the 2021 OWASP Top 10 with Contrast Security featuring Jeff Williams. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to save your seat. Visit, the on-demand library at securityweekly.com/on-demand. If you want to protect your secrets and your passwords, we did a great one with Keeper. I was actually really impressed with their technology. Make sure you go check that one out. And now, on to the news articles for this week. Where do we want to start?
It's a great question.
We think we need to agree on this before we start the segment, like where we want to actually start, because we tend to spend the first few
I know
minutes.
which one. I want to hit Lee's number one.
Lee's number one. Viewing a website, HTML code is not illegal or hacking, according to a professor that has told the Missouri governor this, which we all pretty much said, which I think is a pretty safe bet.
The reason I posted this is because when we talked about this, what was it, a week or two ago? We're like, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. We all know that looking at the source code of a web page is not a freaking criminal act. Somebody tell that governor. And here this guy freaking did it, okay? I know that sounds a little silly, but I'm like, yeah, hello. It's like, what? Opening and unlocked doors is breaking and entering? No. That it may be trespass, but like I said, I just think it's crazy. And the fact that he's lawyered up, and the lawyer is like saying, no statute in Missouri says this is illegal. What the hell are you thinking? There might be some editorial comment from Lee in there, but I really thought it'd be an interesting thing to talk about for a couple minutes.
Well, I mean, as we established, the HTML code is sent to your browser, and your browser interprets it rather. So how could, I mean, I'm struggling to see like how that could possibly culminate to all this. Like that's
would it make a difference if it were compiled code and you were decompiling it, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, that's a lawyer question.
I didn't get the feeling he had to do any decoding or nothing. They were just there in the clear. I mean,
but Jeff's asking the what if. What if you did have to decode it?
Client side, like if it gets trusted and sent to you and you have it on your machine, at that point, and it's public, at that point you better make sure.
We all know the legal principle that possession is 9/10 of the law. So if it's on your machine, and can you do anything you want with it?
Until we start making code NFTs, no.
But I mean, decrypting it for, I mean, I don't know. Like, but you couldn't send it to the person encrypted anyhow. Like, why would you do that in a website? That would make no sense.
It's called HTTPS.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a mutual agreement between client and server, but that's just the transport layer. I mean,
there's even a handshaking.
Yeah, and even a validation of the public key involved. and all
or
that too.
alleged validation.
Yes, I think alleged validation is highly accurate in this case, Larry. Yes.
Yep.
I don't know. Where did they end up with this? Like, has the governor? I didn't follow this story closely because we covered it, last week too. But like, has the governor come around? Like, are there people advising the governor to be like, dude, like, no, you're off your rocker kind of thing? Like, maybe we should bring in some experts to kind of advise you on this.
Even he's double, because that's what they do these.
Yeah, they double down. Politicians tend to double down on stuff like that. I mean, did the governor find attorneys that back the governor on this one? Because I think you'd be hard pressed to find an attorney that would like back up the governor on this. Like, if this is going to court, who's going to back up the governor and be like, no, they'll be like, viewing the HTML source code is, that's hacking. That's a CFAA violation. That's not going to fly. That's not going to fly.
And if it does,
it's only going to get so far before.
And if it does, imagine the precedent it will set.
There's no way that it would be. There's no way it would set precedent. It would get that far to set precedent.
I mean, it'll set precedent one way or another.
Yeah, exactly.
A viewing source is not a crime, or viewing source is a crime. I mean,
right.
It's going to set precedent one way or the other.
I think we need to.
I think you got to go for the right crime.
Yeah,
I think we need to wait and see how this one kind of pans out, and then get one of our attorney friends of the show to weigh in on it.
Ooh. Oh, I like that.
Right?
Let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or one of our attorney co-hosts.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I meant friends in a general sense, whether they're,
sure,
guests or co-hosts. Yeah.
But
Good
we're
stuff.
very close to.
All right. So we'll let that one play out. While we're on the subject, we mentioned a little bit, Intel has backed or created and backed a new standard called HTTPS attestable. What I garnered from this was Intel's proposing a standard that uses kind of like the TPM technology to protect the data outside of the protocol and tunnel that HTTPS creates. And I've always thought about HTTPS as a transport layer. It's protecting the data in transit. Intel has put forth this new standard to protect it once it comes out of that transit. Is how I read this. I don't know if you guys read this one, but
that's your story number 9. HTTPS A.
Intel says, this is my story number 9. So Intel says HTTPS cannot provide security assurances on the request data in compute, so the computing environment remains uncertain risks and vulnerabilities. The community remains uncertain. I don't like their English on this one, but neither here nor there. Like, what they're saying is once it comes out of that, it's up to the compute device to protect that data. Their standard is then put forth to implement other mechanisms to protect that data once it comes out of the transport layer protection that HTTPS gives you.
I haven't read this story, so I'm going to ask the group. So we used to make the joke that you'd put HTTPS on your website, you put SSL TLS on your website, and that's just a secure way to get hacked because you can't see what the transaction is.
Mm-hmm. Well, like, if you're on the server side, you can once it's decrypted.
Right. But now would this kind of prevent that because the payloads that you're sending, there's some authentication and what's the word there? Attestation that the data that you sent is good. I'm wondering what that means. Attestable, as it were.
There's a really lengthy research paper associated with this. That I read the abstract, not the entire paper.
Awesome. So I throw it to the other members of the group that may have.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone read this one in any more detail, but it almost sounded to me like the client and server agree not just on the transport layer, encryption and security, but they can further protect and validate that data once it comes out of the HTTP protocol or tunnel, if you will. Using, of course, Intel's technologies on the chip to provide that validation.
Of course. I mean, it sounds a little bit like digitally signing the content coming over HTTPS. And it also made me think of the PDF-A format, where that's designed to for archiving. It protects the integrity of the document to the end of the republic, which could be every 4 years. But the point being, it's intended for long-term assurance of the information. Makes sense. I'm just not sure how practical this is. Sounds neat.
I think like most things, it starts out as theoretical and then works its way into being more practical. Again, the article that I linked to does link to the entire white paper that was published by Intel, which I think was interesting enough for me, to kind of flag and go back and read and study in a little more detail. So they're talking about
I'm not hating on the idea by any stretch of the imagination. I think this is really interesting.
So they go on to say, after they kind of like poke at HTTPS, to say a hardware-based trusted execution environment such as Intel's SGX software guard extension provides in-memory encryption to help protect the runtime computation to reduce risk of illegal leaking or modifying of private information.
Yeah. And I think keeping information protected in memory is something that's needed all over. Right?
Yeah,
that's one of
right. Like HTTPS doesn't protect it in memory. To Intel's point, I don't think it was intended to do that, though. Is my point?
No, well, remember, SSL was just a transport option. It was originally just you had HTTP sitting on top of SSL or not. And now it's become pretty ubiquitous, which is really cool. But
can you really the abstract secure anything in memory?
Well, it's a couple.
I don't know,
Tyler. How does SGX work to protect things in memory? Right? It uses. Have you studied SGX more so than I have, and just reading a few articles about it, or no?
He's saying no.
All right, moving along. Next story.
I've been in Russian forums doing a lot of Google translating.
Gotcha. I did want to talk about Iranian gas stations that were hacked.
Yeah.
And I got one of your stories I want to grab after.
So my story number 13. So according to media reports, the cyber attack 64411 message appeared to customers that tried to purchase subsidized fuel at folks in the U.S. are going to hold on to your shorts. 20 cents a gallon using government issued cards. 20 cents a gallon. It's a lot cheaper than it is here in the U.S. In any case,
that's simple economics.
It is.
Supply and demand.
So a coordinated attack was ensued. Iranian people couldn't get gas because this message appeared, and all of the pumps essentially had been hacked. Also, as news spread, the digital billboards in multiple cities in Iran started to show a message that read, where's our fuel-free Yamaran station, which was interesting that it was a coordinated attack that the gas station pumps were hacked, as well as the digital billboards. So propaganda plus an infrastructure level attack against Iran. Then there's a statement at the end of the article that it's actually pretty funny. Iranian state television confirmed that these were cyber attacks, because there was kind of speculation, was this some other
somebody getting
thing? They said yes, no, this was a cyber attack, and Iran's Supreme Council of Cyberspace. I have to say that. The Supreme Council of Cyberspace believes the incident is state-sponsored, although it's early to say which country is behind it. Anyone want to venture a guess?
Supreme Council of Cyberspace.
Supreme Council of Cyberspace has not came out and stated the obvious that it was Israel.
But why would Israel do that so blatantly? What other operation was going on that they were utilizing that as smoke and mirror cover?
Again, Tyler's tinfoil hat is like an entire roll of layers.
Dude,
it's an amazing. It's not a hat. It's a full helmet.
It's not even tinfoil anymore. It's a freaking full-on lead helmet.
Full-on lead helmet.
But
all kinds of shielding.
But he's not wrong.
No,
he's not wrong at all. And that's what I love about
it. I think it's a valid.
Mossad was doing. Seritat was in the midst of an operation doing something somewhere,
and they needed a diversion.
Hey, look at that over there!
It is, but I mean, it is out of the play. But it's out of the playbook of Israel. And look, I don't really fault. I mean, if you dig into the history, the geopolitical climate, where Israel is, like, dude, I don't blame him. Like, I really don't. I don't blame him. I think it's actually pretty amazing that Iran just didn't flat out come out and say, like, Israel, can you just knock that shit off? like they didn't even say that. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't blame them. I mean, and I don't even pretend. I know a small fraction of what's happening in that part of the world, and I still don't blame them. I don't.
Yeah, we have a very small perspective. Like, we have a Canada above us. We've got Mexico, and we're yelling about, like, people trying to come to work at a lower wage cost and help us with jobs we don't want to do. Like, we have no understanding of a consistent threat across a not very many mile area of people that literally are just bombing any. Like, you could be under attack at any point. Like, the Iron Dome is
from, like, real. I mean, there's heinous things that happen on the Mexican border. I mean, there's kidnappings and things like that. I don't want to downplay that either, but you put that in the context of Israel, and there's way worse things happening there that they need to be extremely go on the offense, as what we're speculating is happening in this situation. You're right, Tyler?
Yeah.
No, you're not all right? Does it relate to this story, or you're having
your damn story had a link in it that the video started auto playing in the background, had all the auto stuff off, and, like,
I'm sorry. I tried to find good sources that don't do that, but it's hard these days. It's hard.
It's probably, and it was probably porno too, so that's even better.
Yeah. Tyler, while I'm looking at it, I did. Did you read my story number 14, Tyler?
Which one was it? Was that the ransomware? The
Azure AD default configuration bug?
Oh, Azure AD. Yeah. I've been reading that one pretty heavily.
Okay, but so hold that thought, Larry. You wanted to pivot, and then I just want to make sure we cover that.
Yeah. No, I was looking at your story number 21 because relevant to my interests.
This one is in your realm of expertise.
Yeah, and I was reading some of the stuff, and I'm like, well. And I think I had this in the show maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago. Not a big deal, but I looked at this and I'm like, wait, I've done some work around this, and in fact, I've tested some devices to see how they handle GPS epoch. Meaning they didn't make the field large enough to handle the date.
They set the. They use GPS to set the date?
Yes.
Correct,
so
right?
GPS is a highly accurate time source.
Okay.
In fact, Stratum 1 is based off of GPS. Stratum 1 NTP servers are based off of GPS.
How does that work briefly?
Or is it Stratum 2?
How do they use GPS to drive?
Satellites.
They receive the GPS signal from satellite, which has a very accurate time clock.
Okay. The GPS satellites have an accurate time clock that's relayed back down to Earth.
And you can calculate how long it takes to get the because of physics, you can calculate how long it takes to get from satellite to us. Very accurate time clock. And maybe Stratum 1 or Stratum 2 time servers
uses that.
Stratum 1 definitely uses local atomic.
Right, an atomic clock.
Yeah, and that's effectively what's on the satellites. Is an atomic
There's an
clock.
atomic clock on the satellites.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought about this, and when I originally saw the story, I'm like, holy crap! I tested some of these devices to see what happens when you roll back time or roll forward time to the GPS epoch, and then what time do they think it is? Like, we sent some signals, and it was at the time when an epoch was coming up, and we set it forward to that one, and it handled it. But we set it forward to the next one, totally went back in time, like to the 80s or some ridiculous stuff. Like, it was not supposed to do that. So they handled the first one, but they couldn't handle the second one. And arguably the second, and of course I'm like, oh crap, I got to go look at that report again, because, like, when was that second one? I don't think it was that soon. No, it's like 32 years from now. So arguably in their defense for that device, it was one of those, if this device is still in the field 32 years from now, you've got bigger problems than the GPS epoch. And I thought that's what this originally was. But no.
This was dealing specific code that was dealing with leap year.
Yep. Leap year and leap seconds.
Yes. Calculations.
Yep.
Which they link right to the source code that tells you what's wrong. And I didn't...
In GitLab, there's an issue reported.
Right. And I didn't pretend to understand every single line of code in here. However, I kind of derived from the code and from the description that it looked like to me there's an accounting for leap year error that... Leap second that like created a time machine triggering a 1024 week backward time jump from Saturday, October 16th, 2021 to Sunday, March 3rd, 2002. It's just a coding error because
I feel like this is the premise of some show I watch on TV.
Could be, but like coding time and dates is a huge pain in the ass for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
Like there's math involved, but there's like very specific parameters like leap years you have to take into consideration. There's also many different time and date formats that you have to account for. Like I had to do some of that stuff in Python, and especially when you're dealing with APIs in other systems that may present dates in different formats, you have to convert that to a standard date and time format inside of your code. And there's lots of ways to represent date and time. Sometimes, quite frankly, they're represented as a string, which is a huge pain in the ass because they want to be represented as a date. And so,
So I love the code. The comments are: assume leap second 19 by December 31st, 2022. So week 2180 is way in the future. Don't allow it. Don't worry about this. It's too far away in the future.
Too far away. It reminds me of the Y2K bug. Right?
If week 2180, then go to week 1024.
It reminds me of Back to the Future. I saw somebody tweeting about this the other day because aren't all the dates? Was it Lee that posted it?
Well, yeah,
all the dates of Back to the Future have gone way past us.
Yes,
correct.
Red letter date in history. October 5th, 1955.
Dave Kennedy's been posting about his.
Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking
that's the day I invented the flux capacitor. I was hanging a picture over my toilet and slipped and hit my head in the porcelain. And when I came to, I drew this.
Flux capacitor.
I've not seen that movie ever.
Great movie. I watched that movie so much as a kid.
Oh my God.
Too. Yeah.
I still do.
I think a lot of us in our generation, that's the one of the movies we watched a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah. Tyler, let's jump to story number 14, which is one I kind of I assigned to you. Because I know you love this stuff. We're actually talking about like, in your LinkedIn or resume or whatever, like you put like what you're good at, and like I was thinking about mine would read like not Windows, like deep Windows shit, like love networking, IoT, Linux, Unix. Awesome Python, but like not a lot of Windows crap. And Tyler, I think you fill some of the Windows crap for us, which is why I assigned to you Azure AD default configuration blunders. Curious
this one is definitely. I mean, it's nothing new, and it's nothing that people that attack AD don't know as far as recommendations around security. This is a great article because it kind of covers down some of the defaults that people don't often realize. When you configure Azure AD, a lot of the default roles and how it is actually configured is a little bit different than Active Directory. Mm-hmm. And so you end up with information similar to Active Directory, where if you get a user account, right, like you can query Active Directory via LDAP and gain knowledge of who the domain admins are, what the domain functional level is. Anything as a low-level user within inside of Active Directory, you can do those kind of queries. Same thing for Azure AD. You get tenant IDs, you get role permissions. You can even create users as a base default user in Azure.
What?
As a base user.
Hold on.
So
say that again. As a
default user,
non-privileged default user. You can create other user accounts by default?
Correct. And you can also read so there's a lot of read permissions, but there's a bunch of things that allow you as a regular user within inside of Azure, such as creating apps. Now, on the surface, that's kind of by default. There's a million apps that get created within inside of Azure AD as part of kind of how it functions. But the fact that you can create apps and assign certain permissions, you end up with these different roles and permissions that end up getting extended across groups and other roles.
No,
so
wait, Tyler, hold on. I'm just going to stop you right there. Azure AD apps are different or the same from O365 apps?
Azure AD apps are different.
Okay.
Technically. So Azure AD in and of itself is a separate instance, separate tenant from Azure AD. Now there's hooks and ties between all those with your AD account, and whether you're running hybrid and you're syncing across with the AD Connect back down to an on-premise Active Directory, all of those things kind of tie together, but each of those are different. So Azure AD is different than O365 tenancy and what you have up there from a ATP E5 instance that has certain security controls and protocols in there. Now, the accounts may sync back and forth or may not for email accounts and user accounts. But Azure AD is the Active Directory equivalent or maybe tied into your on-prem Active Directory. And so those are all separate. And that causes a big confusion because you have groups in Active Directory, you've got roles inside of Azure AD, and then you have apps that may hook into O365 that also tie to security APIs for something like Sentinel or multiple things. So this gets very difficult to audit and understand what is default and what is not. So this kind of covers a lot of the caveats that you may not understand from a security standpoint and how to better secure your default roles and deployments of your Azure AD tenancies and what's actually exposed.
One of the things I gleaned from that, being a Linux admin, is versus a Windows admin. Like Windows admins have their work cut out to redefine what the defaults are for security, right? I feel like you've got a lot more work to do I'll use the term Windows admin as the kind of a generic term, whether you're Azure AD or on-premise or Exchange or O365, you got your work cut out in so many different configuration options to kind of reel in the reins on those defaults versus than when you're standing up a Linux or even an AWS kind of Linux based kind of infrastructure. Is that a fair assessment, Tyler?
Yeah, that's probably a fair assessment. There's just so much to how this interplays and interoperates with Microsoft services in general, and then what they've had to connect in and out of these. You start to think about something like Teams or SharePoint, right? Like just simply having O365 or Teams, you end up with SharePoint. Well, if you have a Teams meeting and you're not allowing guests, like there has to be a way for authentication to work in order to have these meetings inside of the infrastructure to then allow outside organizations not signed in and make a connection into essentially an Active Directory, so that you end up with things like guests or guest apps. You've got your SAML and OAuth that's happening on the backside of that and how all that kind of interties. So you are a lot more in-depth because of the technology that's being provided across all of the different platforms that interop with these services.
It's crazy. Craziness.
Which is why, like, again, like moving to the cloud, like this is one of the things that, and this is why our Azure AD assessment tends to do so well, is because no one really has a great grasp on a lot of the security implications because it's so deep, and just understanding the roles and connections between each of these accounts gets very complicated. So this is why there's a big push to have these assessments to understand what the security is, and why moving to the cloud is not always a better idea.
No,
yeah, there's a bunch of advantages for something like E5 or O365 where you can offload some of the security for email, but you're also, when you start to talk about doing a hybrid approach or integrating Active Directory, Azure AD, and your on-prem, and then O365, there's a lot there to do, and there's a lot of security caveats that you're going to run into if you don't watch out and do this the right way.
Yeah, I feel like there's not like
the
less
sales
stuff.
reps. The sales rep told me that I wouldn't have to worry about security if I just moved everything to the cloud.
Well,
you'll be compliant, right? You'll be PCI compliant if you move to the cloud, because that offloads the responsibility.
PCI compliance aside, I think Jeff brings up a great point in that you might be absolved of some of the operating system level controls that you traditionally had to worry about if everything was on-prem, but you got a whole bunch of other stuff to worry about on how these applications and services in the cloud communicate, the controls and the permissions between them, right? Because even as a Linux user, I can fire up really any browser, log into my Azure AD and O365, and I've got Calendar, I've got Teams, I've got SharePoint, I've got all the Microsoft apps available to me, and that team really has no visibility into the operating system layer on my workstation and no visibility into the operating system layer conceivably in a lot of those apps.
And that doesn't even take into account some of the things like users being able to authorize apps for delegation of permissions, or what an app requests for delegation of permissions and is allowed by default because of default role bases. So getting all that right, not just the administration, which is important because you got conditional access controls that you need to worry about and get right, but you've got users that have the rights to authorize and do certain things. You just look at something like a Google sign-in page, right, for any of the apps that you see out there. Well, O365 and your Azure AD can also allow those sign-ins if you don't restrict that, and so you end up with authorizations for things that you don't want authorizations, or you don't want your users to be able to authorize.
Right. They have locked down a lot of the Power Automate and things like that. Like, because I kind of pushed the envelope there. In Microsoft defaults, when you start enabling like external access to some of those things in Power Automate, and what's the other one? There's the
Power BI,
Flow. Things like that. Like those, they really restrict to internal only. Even Teams, right? Is that by default Teams doesn't allow external guests to connect? So they've done a pretty good job with some default policy.
I think that is the default now. Yeah.
Easily overridden.
You make that request and someone makes a change, and then.
But at least in theory, it's a deliberate. Yeah, my point was basically. It's not as cut and dry. You've got some work to do. It's yet another promise of a silver bullet or a holy grail that, in reality might actually take more work, and what every company worries about costs more, especially not to bring up PCI, but if you're logging stuff and you have to retain those logs, so you have to store it somewhere. A lot of my clients, they pull all whatever logs that they have happening in the cloud. Won't say which one specifically. They're pulling it back locally on-prem because it's too expensive.
Yeah, agreed.
That being said, though, like there is a big use case around a lot of the telemetry that Microsoft's able to gather and utilize things like Sentinel in order to correlate a lot of those logs. We see a lot of our clients moving off of Splunk because Splunk is so ridiculously expensive based on the amount of info that you're gathering. And so if you're able to correlate high net value assets with inside the cloud and have a centralized logging that has good telemetry and the ability to do things with things like KQL that have very, very specific and very scalable query languages to identify and respond to incidents, that's when it starts to make a good use case. But again, you have to have the talent and resources that understand, KQL, that understand Azure AD, that understand the Microsoft ecosystem within inside of the cloud in order to adopt that and make that a worthwhile venture. And so I think we have at Security Unlocked, we have I think it's an 1.5-hour workshop kind of dedicated to how to set up threat hunting, incident response in the cloud, how to look at things in Sentinel, and how to kind of run through a lot of the base ground to get up and going with inside the cloud. So you've got good logging, so you have an understanding of what KQL is and how it actually works. I believe Darwin's got a great workshop set up for that. So I would definitely check that out if you're thinking about and trying to look at what this all means from a cloud perspective.
You kind of had me.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Final thought. You kind of had me when you said you had clients that are actually using Splunk. But go on. Go ahead.
Oh, how the tides shift. I do want to talk about mobile security for a moment. I'm a big Google Pixel fan, and I've been following the Pixel 6 actually for quite some time. I'm really excited about the Google Tensor, which is this article was actually really good. I mean, Google's touting this as a new standard for mobile security, and it's really, I think, as security practitioners, it's worth a look and a study of what Google is releasing with the Pixel 6. Even if you might not be a Pixel user, I think it's a great, I encourage folks to look into this. So I've been following these stories. So Google Tensor, a quote from the article, Security Core is custom-designed security subsystem dedicated to the preservation of user privacy. It's distinct from the application processor, not only logically but physically, and consists of a dedicated CPU, ROM, and one-time programmable OTP memory, crypto engine, internal SRAM, and protected DRAM. For the new Pixel line, the Security Core's primary use cases include protecting user data keys at runtime, hardening secure boot, and interfacing with the Titan M2TM, which is the place where they would store things like your biometrics and things of that nature. Lots of new security features on the Pixel 6. They'll do an evaluation of all the apps you have installed and their permissions. They will alert you through the notifications bar when an application is requesting more permissions than they think it needs, in all kinds of really new security things, including some really cool new phones. I'm excited. Tomorrow I'm gonna put in my order for mine when they become available, because I think it's really cool. Again, I'm not an iPhone user. Nothing wrong with iPhones, or that ecosystem obviously has its own security benefits as well. But I think this is really a cool model to study. I've been seeing a lot of articles about it. So
this is like a TPM on steroids for a mobile device with the old hardened phones that we used to look for with like things like BlackBerry and even the black phones that several agencies used.
Hey, Tyler, your dog's home. Or someone just walked in your front door.
Someone's trying to walk somewhere.
How are they making decisions on what they think you should be doing and not doing?
Yeah, and when you have an operating system that can be modified by the mobile operator,
Yeah, well, that's different. So what they're touting here is the specifically security features that will be available on Google branded phones, which is why I really advocate, if you're going to be in the Android ecosystem,
it's got to be a Google branded device. If you read
my story, whatever the number was on here, 7, it really talks about that some of these things are coming out first on Android 12 on Pixel and will be kind of exclusive. Now it's up to the other providers to adopt these features or not, I believe, on other platforms. But the things like the security enhancements, a security hub allows you to manage all your security settings in one place, protect your phone apps, Google account and passwords with a central view of your device's current configuration. So Security Hub will alert you if there's things with your account that you need to secure, a Google account with things from your app security, so applications that might be requesting permissions that they deem harmful. So identify harmful applications and allow you from this one hub to uninstall them. They give you a privacy dashboard, simple and clear timeline view of the apps that have access to your location, microphone, and camera in the last 24 hours.
Can we get
I think it's a huge security step forward.
Can we get that dashboard in a single pane of glass?
It's a single pane of glass, Larry.
And it's right here on your phone, so when you drop it, it's like multiple panes.
Right.
Never mind.
Yeah. So they're storing the your fingerprint in the TPM system to make sure it never leaves the device, which is really cool. I'm excited. Of course, I mean, I'm a Pixel user, so.
The other thing I think I read about, I don't know if it was in Android 12 or where, is they're actually changing for apps that you haven't used in a while. It actually takes away the permissions and you have to re-grant them. Which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah,
because over-provisioned is a problem.
Yep, and over-provisioned once forever is also a problem.
It is, because you install that weird app so you can control like your Christmas tree or something, and you only use that because I legit had an app I had to install to control my Christmas tree. And then
Understood.
you use that once a year, right? So revoking those permissions when it's not in use is a great thing.
I also had an app that I had to install to control your Christmas tree.
Yeah. My Christmas tree.
Did it work?
Wait a minute.
Yep. Yes.
Oh, I forgot to write this article up, Larry.
Oh, which one?
70% of Wi-Fi networks cracked by researcher to show their lack of security.
I have that one. It is my story number.
I like how we can add stories.
Number three, cracking Wi-Fi at scale with one simple trick.
Wi-Fi at scale. Okay.
So what was this about, Larry?
So this was quite amazing, and it's honestly it's a wrap up of a bunch of techniques that we teach in 617. So first, it involves doing some sniffing and capturing, not the old school like if I want to do WPA2 pre-shared key cracking, I needed to catch you logging onto the network and get that four-way handshake. It uses the PMK ID, which is in the beacons. Hey, I'm a network, come connect to me. If you're going to connect to me, use this when roaming is supported. So 802.11r. And it's basically an indicator of, hey, when you join this network, you're going to use this key so that when you roam to this other access point, we don't need to spend this time recalculating keys. We already know what it is. Just go. So you can observe when you do the you only need to observe the first step of the authentication, not the beacons. And you can get that PMK ID by saying, hey, I want to join the network. Great, here's a PMK ID. And then just don't ever join the network. So you can get PMK ID with that. And then you can crack the pre-shared key. What this researcher found was he went and walked around Tel Aviv, captured 7,700 networks that had WPA2 pre-shared key, and was able to obtain PMK IDs for 7,700 networks, roughly. With that, he went and did some password cracking.
So the PMK ID inside there is the shared secret, the secret for the network.
So instead of needing to capture the four-way handshake to brute force the pre-shared key, you need one packet that you can get the access point to create for you. Hey, can I join you? Yeah, here you go. Here's some key material.
And was that for roaming?
For roaming.
Yeah. Okay.
And once you have that key material, you can do some brute force math to recover the pre-shared key for that network. So for 7,700 networks that he got PMK IDs for, not if roaming's off.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Pre-shared, what'd you say? Pre-shared math? What'd you call that?
Huh?
You mean cryptography?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that what they're calling it these days?
That is.
Yes.
It is.
Matt.
So
Is he?
So
isn't he just doing encrypt and compare, or is he actually breaking it?
Breaking it. This is it's a known technique, but he did some really smart things. He thought about how folks create passwords for their pre-shared key network in Tel Aviv. And many folks, and I think it's based on the provider, like the local provider, say, hey, we need to set a password for your network. How about we just use your phone number? And then it's easier for you to remember. So he took Hashcat and did a mask-based attack for the
phone number,
the Tel Aviv country code, the country code for Tel Aviv, and then did numeric brute forcing for the remainder of the number.
So you know some given plain text in every
you know some given plain text, and you know the format for the rest, all digits,
all digits,
and the length.
Yes.
And he recovered 2,200 passwords.
That's cryptography.
That is. He was playing the role. He is, in this case, a crypt analyst. A crypt analyst, Jeff, right?
Then he took rocku.txt and did a word list-based attack against the remaining and recovered another 1,500.
Wow.
So he recovered 3,700 of the 7,700. So it was the math was 70%.
So wait, he too waited in virtual lines to get a RTX 3090 to make this go faster?
No. All done on his laptop.
No.
194,000 keys per second.
Wow.
Yep.
We can make that faster here in the studio because we actually scored an RTX 3090.
Yep. But you start scrolling through the article and you all of a sudden it's like a server with all sorts of GPUs in it. And he's like, nope, didn't even need to use that. My laptop worked just fine with CPU.
Well, because he applied the basics of cryptanalysis, Jeff, right?
Yeah, known plain text.
Yep.
So I have a stupid question, Larry.
Yeah.
Why is he running Hashcat as root?
There's a couple of other inconsistencies. You don't need to run Hashcat as root. Maybe he was Maybe he was on Kali and you're logged in as
it was on
root.
his personal laptop.
But yeah,
raise your hand if you're not on root when you're logged onto your personal Linux device.
The other one that I noticed that we're a little bit of
note, I'm not raising my hand.
The other one that was inconsistent at the very end was that how should I protect myself? Choose a complex password. Yep. Don't use it's home stuff, so PSK. Yep. Don't use the default. Don't use what your vendors. Update your router firmware. Disable weak encryption protocols such as WAP or WAP1. I've never heard of WAP or WAP1.
What's WAP1?
I don't know what WAP is, so I can't even begin to tell you what WAP1 is.
Maybe WAP, it's a typo.
WAP and WPA1.
WPA. It's a typo one way or the other.
But it's a double typo. Like it's
double
WAP.
Typo.
Yeah, but it was an editor that probably did that.
What's a WAP? Never mind.
There's a song about
he's
that.
So smart, even I don't know what he's talking about.
WAP. Give your dog a bone.
Wait, that's also about that song, right?
Yep.
Knick-knack, paddywhap. Give your dog a bone. Oh boy. Moving
I
along.
love seeing crypto. I love seeing crypto.
Speaking of
practice,
root,
though.
I agree, Jeff. It's cool. I did have. Speaking of root, PHP FPM. Have any of you guys run PHP FPM?
What?
I'm really, after I read this article, I was like, I'm so glad we just sunsetted the server where I was running PHP FPM because it has a privilege escalation vulnerability. You can read, the technical details in this article are amazing. What I gleaned from it, and in the synopsis, is the attack basically stemmed from the way that these processes, Apache and Nginx and PHP FPM, and you may run some of these together. In fact, if you're running PHP using Nginx, you're using PHP FPM because it's essentially the PHP interpreter / app server for PHP code. So you can use an Apache plugin, or you can use a separate PHP FPM server that serves to basically interpret the PHP code. That's what PHP FPM does. Nginx relies on that exclusively. And in all three of these cases, and you folks have seen this before with other, I even think SendMail and other mail servers used to work this way. The parent process runs as root. The child processes run as a lower privileged user. And the lower privileged processes that run as children are managed as, I don't know if a queue is the right term for it, but they're run based on the load. Right? And you can, as an administrator, configure how many child processes should I run. And the software manages, when I receive so many requests, I pass that off to a child process, and it manages the whole kind of processing of those requests through a parent that's running as root, child processes running as a regular user. The vulnerability and associated exploit relied on the fact that child and parent processes share things in memory, such as pointers, and there was actually a multiple vulnerability. To get to the second vulnerability you have to exploit, the first vulnerability is the child process kind of shares a pointer with the parent process. Then you can kind of dump in the parent process and then exploit something else in the parent process to become root. And this is why I hate parent processes running as root with children that are running as non-root. I much prefer all of the processes associated with a particular service to run as a non-root user. And actually, some of my examples that I've covered on previous shows and technical segments show you how to do things like run Nginx as not a privileged user, because in fact, it doesn't really need to be root when it runs, especially inside of a container.
The only reason it needed to be an escalated user is to bind to port 80 and 443 because they're
and in a container you can fake that.
Yep,
you can have the container listen.
Ding 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 ding.
Exactly.
Ding ding.
Which maybe people that are better than Linux than me, which is not saying much, that you could cheat and get around that in Linux. Because like if the only reason your process needs to run as root is the fact that it needs to listen on a port less than 1024, like to me that's a bad reason. Like can't you just make an exception for that and run it as non-root? So but that was the basis of this local root and privilege escalation vulnerability in PHP.
Lee's got a comment here.
Lee.
So isn't also using the root privilege to switch the effective user ID of the child process away from root to something else? But if you're already not root, who cares?
It's using the child process to get into the memory of the parent process, which is running as root, which is the way
I know that. What I'm saying is that the root you're running as root, you can spawn a process as not root, and so their argument to be running as root is because I want to spawn things as not root.
Right.
Just run the whole thing as not root to begin with, and move on.
Agreed, Lee. Agreed.
Again, then you run into the depending on what port binding and maybe
right
and other and it's interesting when you really dig into the Linux internals. Like root is kind of like it's a fallacy in Linux. It really is, because there's so many ways to kind of get around the various permissions that you think, oh, like I need to be root, but no, you don't. You need these capabilities, and I can assign a program or binary those capabilities or service those capabilities. I can configure an app armor profile to get around some. Like there's so many different ways.
But have you ever tried to convince an admin that they don't need to be running as root?
I think users, Jeff, like actual humans that need to, like services aside, humans that need to log into a system. We had this conversation with Brandon, I can't remember his last name, from Capsulate. He and I were nerding out about this particular point when we were talking about the sudo vulnerability. Like, do I need to have a program that grants me root privileges, or do I just need to become root and get rid of the entire, tens of thousands of lines of code in sudo that like grant me root privileges? Like, why can't I just use su and just become root in that command window to do what I need to do as root, right?
Do you want the answer from a PCI perspective?
Yes.
Because you can log sudo activity, and there's a requirement that all root activity must be logged.
Yeah, but if I believe, and Jeff, hear me out on this one.
Sure.
If I can log that activity without sudo, so I can use something like auditd or Wazoo or a log beat from Elastic that logs every command regardless of a user privilege, do I meet that requirement still, even if I'm not using sudo?
Can you provide attribution with that method?
Yeah, I can attribute it to each user. Like each user on the system entered these commands, and I can log that through a different subsystem other than sudo.
Right.
Well, the other problem with the logging and tracking all activity is, root is rather an anonymous account, but if you're using the sudo, you're hopefully tying it to whatever admin elevated their privileges using sudo.
I can still log that. So I can say a regular user issued the su command and became root and executed those commands and tie it back to a user. Sure.
So yes, given all those caveats, yes, that would be passing. I've had more issues with admins that are like, you're not taking root away from me, MFer, go away. Now, granted, it's been a few years, but I've had too many conversations with admins, whether it's in AD and Windows, they're running as domain admins and checking their email and surfing the web and stuff like that. It's just, there's this old-fashioned principle. Tell me it's still valid, but the root account, the global, the master domain admin account should never be used, and that password should be written down, literally locked in a safe. And in case of emergency, break glass. But everything else that you're doing should be, limited access using sudo or run as or something like that.
Speaking of going back in technology, I want to talk about EBCDIC, because we talked about talked about it last week. I've got just an amazing story. I love this story so much. So the title was EBCDIC is incompatible with GDPR. And like I saw the title, I'm like, you got to tell me more about this. Like what is the correlation between EBCDIC and GDPR? So there is a bank, and there is a customer of this bank, and the customer reported that the bank could not spell the customer's name correctly due to diacritical marks. There's another name for the, tilde over the A, the whole. There's another name for that didn't come to me, but the article references them as diacritical marks, which is also accurate. So the customer, after much frustration, I'd imagine, filed the GDPR complaint under Article 16. If you're curious what Article 16 says about this, it says, and I quote, "The data subject shall have the right to obtain from the controller, without undue delay, the rectification of inaccurate personal data concerning him or her." That's what it says, directly from the GDPR regulations. So like that basically means, as a user, I have the right to my data being accurate when you're storing it. And in this case, since there was a diacritical mark in the person's name, that person's data was not being stored accurately. The bank came back and said, we can't do this because the system that we have that is based on a mainframe, they said a U.S. mainframe.
Not based on a mainframe. It's running on a mainframe.
It's running a mainframe from a U.S. manufacturer is all they said.
From like 30 years ago.
And from the 90s. So you got to imagine there's an IBM, most likely an IBM-based mainframe that is only supporting EBCDIC. EBCDIC is a very limited character set and doesn't support the diacritical marks that is in this person's name. And they said it's impossible because EBCDIC, which is just.
So what was the ruling?
I don't think there was a final ruling. They're kind of like
there is a ruling. I had to dig for it. It's not in the article you posted, but the court actually ruled that the citizen has the right to have his name spelled correctly. So
unfuck it.
Yeah. So fix it, bank. Now I haven't found what the bank's going to do about it.
Yeah. Like, what do you do? So EBCDIC, which is interesting, extended binary coded decimal interchange code is what it stands for. Developed in 1963 to 1964 by IBM for their mainframes and AS400 computers.
Correct.
Which are still very much, as we established last week, are still very much in use today. I don't know that, do they have updates to those particular operating systems that can support ASCII or UTF-8 or any of the more modern kind of standards?
I think the answer is yes, but it did. Yeah. I did have flashbacks of trying to get printers to work back in the Unix days and the mainframe days, and having to learn about PostScript and all sorts of other weird stuff. And I'd rather not relive those days.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty interesting story.
It was fun. It was just fun to see EBCDIC in an article.
Agreed.
And NPM packages or ransomware or mining.
Oh, so the NPM thing, I loved the command.
Yeah,
like in the JavaScript, they're executing cert util and downloading an executable to the user's workstation, which is malware. And I'm like, so the link
and mining.
Yeah, and mining. But like the link is like this huge GitHub like thread of people going, yeah, like I'm implementing this library and I got this malware on my computer. Like not just like one user, like multiple users of UA parser JS. I mean, so much so that they're members of our team that talked to our developer members of our team that were like, we're not using this library, right? Like, please make sure we're not using this library. But I think this is also, since it was Windows malware, more likely targeting JavaScript applications running locally, like Electron apps running locally on the user's workstation.
I think I had this same story, and I remember when I was reading about it, the developer's source code repository got hacked. His account got taken. And I'm like, why the hell aren't you securing your source code access?
I mean, GitHub has made strides to protect those source code repositories. I mean, you can't log as of August 2021, right? You can't log in with a username and password. You gotta have a token based authentication. I mean, they've really been making strides to lock that stuff down. I mean, they've had two-factor in there for a long time, and the call goes out to folks that are maintaining even semi-popular, let alone extremely popular open source GitHub repositories to protect your accounts, to use that two-factor and lock things down. But again, it goes back to our AD conversation, to really a lot of our conversations about configuration. Make sure that stuff is configured properly. I mean, just because you're not hosting your own GitHub or SVN instance, there's still configuration you have to apply to make sure things are secure.
I thought it was pretty funny. It did install for Linux as well, by the way. It had a Linux variance for it in the pre-install.sh.
Nice.
But it also checked for RU, UA, BY. It checked for a few countries from free geo, to make sure that they were not within that country, otherwise it quit. So false attribution, false flag exercise, I don't know. Like maybe keeping the government off their ass. But there's some interesting stuff in there between the Monero mining and the keylogger and credential stealer that it dropped. Some interesting tradecraft that got, we've been talking about packages being a huge vector that I think we're going to see more of, like keeping a review eye on what packages you're installing, what libraries get installed as part of packages, and then how do you secure that full chain down from the library to the package to the distro to the the update. That's a big problem and concern that we're going to have to deal with in the future.
And Tyler, I'm a huge proponent of putting guardrails and limits on packages that are, or add-ons or packages that you're using, putting guardrails on that so they can't do things like download a file from the internet, so they can't do things like access files they're not supposed to. You're including these libraries and add-ons for a specific purpose.
Unless they're logged on as root, by the way.
True, but you should have the ability to put some guardrails on there, and I think the malicious Firefox add-ons is one such case. Flipping over to the browser, there was a malicious Firefox add-on that blocked your browser from downloading security updates. Like, why should an add-on have the ability to affect the main program's ability to download updates? So they essentially configured a proxy server and used some like whitelisting, blacklisting kind of things to say you can't contact.
Is that a rhetorical question?
It's now called an allow list and a deny list.
Yes, thank you, Larry.
Is that rhetorical, or do you want the answer?
No, I do want an answer.
Because somebody was having a problem and that made it work.
Yep.
Well, I think it's that usability versus security is what you're talking about, Jeff, right?
Something like that.
Because there are use cases where a library that I import into my React app should have permissions to do things, and if I restrict those permissions, that's not going to work and halt production. Same thing in your browser. There could be things where a legitimate add-on needs to do something in terms of restricting traffic or interacting with the proxy, but there's also malicious use cases as well. How do we differentiate between the two? I mean, this is, people thought SBOM is the answer, and that's great to know what you have, but Josh Marpet would be jumping up out of his seat during this conversation. But
Yes.
to me, that only solves part of the problem. Like we have to be able to apply proper controls to these add-ons or libraries when we're incorporating that into our code or other.
So does that fall under security, or does that fall under the developers and the CDIC pipeline and the unit testing that happens as part of that?
Yeah, I feel like mature organizations with more resources are better equipped to deal with this issue, Tyler. Having that really sound and robust CI/CD pipeline sets you up for success in that I can go developer request that they want an add-on in this code, and it goes through a rigorous testing process before it ends up in production. Not everyone's at that level.
I would even say large organizations, though, are not equipped to handle this call it
I'd say most
20-person security team where they're trying to deal with incidents, deal with pen tests, deal with security requests, respond and architect secure environments. Even those, like, they're not coders, they're not developers. Like, how do you fit this into a risk threat profile model that makes sense outside of, very explicit AI and ML, like I hate to say it, code reviews that do the dynamic analysis prior to code push. Like, static analysis only goes so far because it doesn't scale. There's not enough people that understand the attacks and understand the code and have the time to look at it with inside of an org that has the capability to employ someone like that.
And also, advanced defensive techniques that are looking at these libraries that you're importing and looking at how you're using them. Even that's a hard problem to solve. One of my gripes as a developer was GitHub would say, hey, you're using a library and it has vulnerabilities. And I'm like, that's great. Let me dig into that. And then I'm like, all right, I'm incorporating that library, but like I'm never calling the method that you're saying is vulnerable in my code. I'm calling other methods which aren't vulnerable, but I'm not calling the method in that library, in that object that I'm importing that's vulnerable. But I'm calling the non-vulnerable one. I mean, I could eventually.
Now GitHub could dig deeper to figure that out.
But that's hard. That's really hard. And I've talked to people that make this software, Larry. It's a very hard engineering problem to solve.
And how much of that is on GitHub's and how much of that is on you as the developer?
Right? Yeah, no, it's fair.
Yeah.
It's not an easy problem to solve.
No. Hey, speaking of not an easy problem to solve, Paul, my story number 5, the title doesn't do it a lot of justice, the copyleft compliance projects. This is a story that the Software Freedom Conservancy is filing a lawsuit against Vizio, the TV manufacturer and other stuff.
Oh, okay. Not the Microsoft Flowchart.
Nope. Vizio, for what it calls, and I'm reading from the article here, repeated failures to fulfill even the basic requirements of the GPL. The lawsuit alleges that Vizio's TV products built on its SmartCast system contain software that Vizio unfairly appropriated from a community of developers who intended consumers to have very specific rights to modify, improve, share, and reinstall modified versions of the software. Can you say Linksys?
Yeah, all over again. Yep.
On how many Vizio TVs? Like, I would totally run OpenVizio on my TV.
Yeah, the TV stuff is really it's heinous.
And
is it Vizio that I don't know what I bought TVs for 2 of my kids. It's a really crappy implementation of Android.
It's probably Vizio.
And it might be Vizio.
Yeah.
Or high scene or whatever it is.
Oh no, there's the other one that you can like get a massive decently LCD screen at like BJ's or Costco that like has no ability to tune into TV. It's like all based on their app stuff, and they're super cheap type of stuff. Like when a couple years ago when we bought TVs,
TCL.
TCL. That's the one.
That might be the one I have.
Yeah.
TCL is the Roku stuff.
Yeah, it's
they're upgraded versions of Roku.
And they're hella cheap.
Non-upgraded version is the app version that runs the stupid Android shit.
I think that's the ones I have on sale at Best Buy last year, like Black Friday kind of deal, and they run a really crappy Android. It only supports 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. The Android on it is really slow. Like it works. I got to keep on top of the settings and stuff like that. But it's bad.
But then again, the TV was cheap for your kids' room.
Exactly. I didn't need to add another device to have the smart TV functionality. And I monitor it very closely.
I will say that we have the LG and has the built-in stuff, and the LG stuff is actually fairly decent. And we've got all the apps, and I love the smart TV. And
Samsung has the Tizen stuff, which is pretty vulnerable as well.
Yeah,
I think it's a Linux-based.
I haven't seen the stuff about the LG, but I'm sure it's just as vulnerable.
Yeah, but the TV stuff is bad. It's bad. It's very hackable.
The updates on the TV stuff is scary. Like
if you
at some point, that's going to be a big deal.
Because I feel like they produce these really cheap TVs. They roll together like the firmware. They put the minimum amount of effort into that firmware and that system. They release like very
it's wireless
sparse
routers all over again, right?
Yeah, it's very sparse updates.
You're expecting a 2-year lifespan.
Right. Right. And then they're done, and then they're on to the next cheaper model where they're, developing even whatever different firmware, and they're not maintaining the old because that's a cost to them. Yeah, I agree. It's bad. It's a bad situation.
I will say I'm happy with my LG for exactly the opposite of those reasons, because we get lots of updates. Like, it seems like every time I go to open an app, there's an update for it. Because the apps are maintained by a third party. Yeah. And we get notifications when there's an app update for the TV. Like, I turn it on first thing in the morning, like, hey, we need to update your TV. Would you like to do that now? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All the time.
Is that coming from the iPad or from the internet?
I don't know. Like, in hindsight, I'd really like a TV that's really just a monitor. And I want to go then choose what device plugs into that HDMI that gives me the ability to use my entertainment system.
Well,
and like maybe that choice is NVIDIA, because I think NVIDIA does a really good job of keeping up with their
NVIDIA
devices.
Would build something internally that's integrated, I would 100% buy it. Like Roku's doing a pretty good job, honestly. If I had to pick one, it's Roku.
But Roku's really proprietary, which almost makes me have even more hesitation because they're so proprietary. And I think when things get really proprietary like that, like no one's lifting up the covers on it. Like
it comes down to like, how do you segment this in your network anyway? Like thinking about that, like I tried guest isolation. That's a horrible fail. That does not work. Remotes don't work. App streaming doesn't work. Kids trying to send things to it doesn't work. Like, So how do you actually secure the things that you don't trust in your network that still need functionality? This is what we went back to, Paul. Like, how do you design a home network that still works for your family?
But have it be maintainable, because we could all build a Raspberry Pi that gives you probably pretty similar functionality, but then the onus is on the user to keep that shit up to date, to have a Raspberry Pi, let's say, or some other embedded computing device.
Or BeagleBone Black.
So you're going to run Kodi on that, but the support for all the apps isn't quite there.
And then you're rooting or jailbreaking something to run Kodi.
Right. Or you're rolling your own Android device. Like, it's a lot of work to get a really reliable device. You can do it. It'd probably be more secure, but you've got a lot of work.
It is not yet the year of Linux on your TV.
No. I mean,
but I think maybe this is getting there.
Linux is on your TV, but either it's something you got to put a lot of work into, or you got to trust whatever's coming from the provider that they're not keeping up to date. We
need zero trust for our TVs.
I mean, I have zero trust in my TV already.
Yeah, you just don't configure the Wi-Fi or the network on it, right? And use some other device.
But then it's not usable.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, even if you do build your own crap, you end up with the problem of like a usable remote for your kids or your wife, right? Like all of the apps you need and something that functions as intended for most users to use.
But then,
then you got to support it.
Trying to navigate HDMI and all the nuances that are associated with it is a complete nightmare. Like sound and video and network and how it all intertwine. Like, I've ripped stuff out of my home entertainment stuff and put new stuff in just so it can be more usable. Because when we're sitting here doing a podcast, there's people at home, quite frankly, that are trying to watch. All they want to do is watch TV, right? So, I mean, some of the solution is you just give them an Xbox and let them run off the X. Quite frankly, that might be the most secure and most usable solution, is just throw an Xbox in every single one of your TVs and be like, look, this is where you play games and this is where you watch TV.
Yep.
Can you get YouTube TV on an Xbox?
I don't know.
You can.
Yeah.
There you go.
Beautiful. I think YouTube...
PlayStation as well. In fact, you can get live TV on PlayStation. PlayStation Now has had that for quite a while. Like, I don't personally know because I don't own a gaming system, but that's what most users use, is that PlayStation Now, that Sony network integration.
Right. The problem with that, though, is when you want to watch TV, but your kids want to play video games, now you need multiple... It gets expensive real fast.
Like getting even the latest like PS4, whatever the latest thing is, like end up in lines. Like, people use these for gaming, so there's supply and demand issues and cost to associate with it.
Yeah,
Larry, I want to
real quick.
I want your story number 4 on this topic as well.
Oh, I was going to say I got a PS5 for my oldest daughter a couple weeks ago. Best trade I ever made.
Unlocking an Oculus Go.
Yeah. Hey, before we do that one real quick, just as a little bit of lip service, my story number 1, the mycelium to your mesh network, check that one out. It's the ability for us to do messaging over non-SMS type networks for like freedom and so forth, for quote freedom, and it's not fully baked yet. So go check it out and see what you can do for freedom. But the unlocking the Oculus Go was interesting, and it's looking like the article is completely missing now. But it is effective.
That happens.
It is effectively the ability for you to take the older Oculus Go and without the need to do any hackery, supported from Oculus. Specifically a blog post from John Carmack to say, hey, here's a free an unlocked operating system for you to install on this device, which you can't go back from, and have fun using it.
That's interesting because that Oculus
is it only on the Go?
It's only on the Go.
What is the Go? The Go is different from the Quest?
Yeah, the Go is the original first generation.
The original. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was the like they had the first immersive was like you put the phone in the thing, and then the next generation was Oculus Go.
Okay.
And then you start moving into the Quest.
The Quest is the fully separate kind of system that you can connect as a display device to your PC.
Yes.
And then the Quest 2 is the better version of that you have, Paul.
Right.
And there's another one in there too that all the rendering is done. Is that the Go? All the rendering is done on like a PC with a GPU and feeds it over USB-C.
Yeah, that's the Rift, I thought.
Oh, that's the Rift. No, you're right. That's the Rift.
Yeah.
Okay. I have the Go, and we not the Go. We have the what's the next one?
I have the Quest 2.
I have the Quest. I don't have the Quest 2.
Gotcha.
And we love the Quest. We haven't played it in a little bit. And
I feel like you go through fits and starts with that. Anyway,
and we have issues with it charging. And like I've had to replace the charger and the cables, and still issues with it. It's weird. Like it'll literally stay on the charger in the box for a month, and you go to pull it out, and it's like not charged. So weirdness.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of potential in VR and AR that's just not being tapped because it's a little bit of a barrier of entry, and it takes a little bit of understanding to kind of understand all the nuances between them. But I'm still surprised it hasn't taken off more than it has, even just as a display or alternate display for most people. Like I use mine as a very large monitor oftentimes for my desktop.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'd love to do more of that, and Tyler, maybe we should sync up on how that happens. But
I have, I think, 3 stories I want to cover that are loosely and somewhat not related to cybersecurity.
I think we've all got a bunch of stories like that.
So let's go with Bitcoin mining power plant raises ire of environmentalists. So to quote the article, I thought this was really interesting. Greenidge Generation runs a once mothballed plant near the shore of Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes region to produce about 44 megawatts to run 15,300 computer servers, which is really funny. Plus additional electricity it sends back to the state's power grid, which I also thought was interesting. So like it seems to me that a large corporation or like a large company, I mean, they must have had a lot of capital to buy a power plant that had been a coal-fired power plant that had been decommissioned.
A power plant in a highly regulated industry.
Yeah. So they're going, look, we're going to buy this power plant and it's coal-fired and we're going to run it. And that power plant produces about 44 megawatts of electricity, which is enough to power about 15,000 computers in a mining farm or 35,000 homes, but we're going to use it to power so I don't know what the exact math works out to, but they're using it to power 15,000 computers. They've got enough power left over to send some back to the grid, which to me kind of speaks of we're kind of greasing the wheels. Like we worked with the regulators and the laws in environmental to be like, look, we're going to buy this power plant. We're going to give you guys some power because we know you need power here in the U.S., but we're going to use the rest of our power to mine cryptocurrency. It's a thing, and we're going to buy all the coal and the people to run this plant, which, I mean, it has to cost them a massive amount of money to run this plant. I don't know if the grid paying them for the power they're sending back? They must be. They must be. So they're recouping some of the cost by selling the power back to the grid. I mean, Tyler, this is some of the stuff you were talking about off air last week. I think this is an amazing play. But like to pull this off, there's a lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts doesn't even cover it. So you have a few things there. You've got, they're sending some power back to the grid, pennies on the dollar, and kind of greasing the wheels a little bit. There's not much coming back. Every bit of crypto mining space and colo in the U.S. is pretty well spoken for, taken up, and with inside of contract right now. The exfil from China and China shutting down most of the crypto and the Russian governments taking over crypto sites has forced a good portion of the crypto miners in the game to move to the U.S. There's only so many sites that can power these colos. So for roughly every 280 S19 Pro J amp miners, you're looking at 1 megawatt of power necessary.
Now, hold on. A megawatt is 1 million watts.
Correct.
What is that?
280 miners equals 1 megawatt.
Okay, so what is that? So I've got 200 amps coming to my house. What is that? What is that in amps?
So you're probably running a 200 amp.
Like most homes are 200 amps.
Regular home installation. That's not even, so an 800 amp is going to be what like an apartment building is going to run. Roughly 1,000 to 1,200 amp is necessary for a half a megawatt. Sometimes you can get away with a 2,400 transformer that is, you're pulling in 2,400 amps for roughly 1 megawatt for a colo for about 280 miners.
That's like a significant amount of power. So that power's got to come from somewhere. In this case, it's coal. Like they're feeding like a coal-fired engine in a train, right? Like that's a lot of. You got to burn some. You got to fuel. You got to have some carbon emissions and some carbon offsets. Yeah.
It's a ton of power. When you're talking about mining, though, you're talking about like they're using ASCII miners, probably amp miners. You're talking about something like an S19. You're talking about 1,000 terahashes a second. These are specifically designed for mining.
So these are not like I'm not building PCs with graphics cards. This is specialized computing hardware for mining.
100%. Everything. If you're doing real mining with inside of the industry in bit mining, you are doing it on an ASCII miner. Now these are like
is that like an FPGA?
Kind of. So it's on-chip specific miners that have the mining capability built onto the chip, and it's a single chip board that has a manager with just a NIC and a very, very low OS.
So it's like a single purpose chip that does one set of math really well.
I got you.
So think
it's an IoT device for mining.
So think about this.
Yes.
WEP.
Yep.
Had a chip that could do RC4 really well.
Yeah.
So when WEP was broken and you went to go to move to something else,
new chip.
And you needed a new chip, but everybody had these millions of things in the field, so it needed to be software updatable, which is why WPA is based on RC4. WPA2
can use the same hardware.
WPA2 5 years later, AES,
different chip,
new hardware.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very specific hardware. So they take a ton of power. Very, very. It's a very small market. Honestly, there's not that many players doing this at scale, and all those that are doing it have agreements with power grids where they're taking over sites of repurposed, say like sawmills. They needed a 35 megawatt sawmill factory. So all of these sites have been bought up around the U.S. Now the U.S. has an interesting position on this because technically within the U.S., everything in the power industry is renewable outside of coal. So hydro, solar, nuke, all of those are renewable energies in the grand consortium of international power. And we've been doing that for a very long time. That's not technically what the U.S. would consider renewable. We'd think that as like solar or something geothermal, right? But everybody coming in sees geothermal or nuke, which Georgia is 100% nuclear now, or by January they will be. So all this renewable energy, they can sign off, these Bitcoin miners and companies can sign off on, we're doing renewable energy mining, and have that as one of their ability to do business in the U.S. or to make contracts or as a PR, whatever they're going to do.
Right. Crazy.
Crazy. Some more salad shooter squirrel stories.
Do it.
Cosmic microwave background.
Oh, I love this story. I love this story because
we talked about this off air last week.
We did, and I wanted to cover it in more detail this week because I think it's funny that I was helping my son with his science homework. And as most of us nerds, I think we get excited about helping our children with their science homework because most of us love science. I mean, if you're in, computer security, I mean, you likely have this affinity towards the math and the science. You're kind of like math, and maybe not math, but certainly science people, sure, right? And so so I linked to the video. I actually found the video that my son's teacher had assigned him. It's a 5-minute video on YouTube. It's Neil deGrasse Tyson narrating this video on how Bell Labs physicists Arno Penzias and Robert Woodrow Wilson, by the way, that was his name, set out to map radio signals from the Milky Way. The way I understand the story and the way the video presents it is that AT&T was researching satellite communications. It seemed to me like the first kind of satellite phones is what they were researching. And you think about the history of AT&T, how they were broken up into the different bells. One of the things that AT&T retained as part of the AT&T primary company is Bell Labs, is the research arm. And Unix and a lot of other things came out of Bell Labs. And so in Bell Labs, they're researching satellite technology for communications. They observed that there was this interference in satellite communications, and they didn't know where it was coming from. So they kind of charged these two physicists, Penzias and Wilson, to determine where this interference was coming from. Yep. And they commissioned them this really big antenna. And the story kind of talks about a little bit of the history of this really large antenna. And so the first thing that these two scientists did was point this antenna in just this innocuous, just point it into space. Like we would do is kind of like in our tests, right? Like if there's interference, let me just point it into a point in space where there should be no interference and just see what we get. And they still got this interference. And they were like, being scientists, they're like, okay, what's our hypothesis as to where this interference is coming from? They observed, as most good hypothesis, you go to your observations. There's bird poop from, I think it was pigeons, that's inside the antenna. And it's really funny to watch this video because they kind of gloss over it. But Penzias and Wilson said, as grad students, we did other more horrible things. Then what they were referring to was cleaning the bird poop out of the antenna. So they physically had to climb inside the antenna and clean this bird poop to eliminate it as a potential variable that it was causing this interference. So they cleaned the bird poop. They got the antenna pointed in space, and they're like, we're still getting this microwave radiation interference. And they're like, where could that come from? It turns out that the theories of the Big Bang, that the universe was once this one central mass that basically exploded and created the universe. The result of that was that there are still, to this day, microwave radiation interference in the universe, in space. And that's what they were receiving. They kind of corroborated their story with another university that was 40 miles away. This was in New Jersey, where they had the antenna. And they were like, hey, we're studying the effects of the Big Bang and trying to prove the Big Bang. And they're like, hey, when we point our big antenna into space, we're observing microwave radiation that we believe is causing interference. They end up winning the Nobel Prize because it turns out that it is, in fact, in the universe, there is microwave radiation that can cause interference that is still to this day a result of the Big Bang. Yes. Which I thought, so a lot of interesting things. that at the end of the YouTube video, which is awesome, you should go watch it. Neil deGrasse Tyson has those old folks. We all remember we had the TV with the rabbit ear antennas, and if you tune to a station that in between stations, you get the static, right?
Yep. That's how encrypted traffic should sound like.
Right. 1% of that is microwave radiation interference as a result of the Big Bang, which I think was just really cool. Residual Big Bang microwave radiation.
Cool.
I thought that was a really cool kind of salad shooter kind of story.
On a less technical note, my squirrel story for the week, and where's the lower third, guys? Are you asleep in the back room?
Yeah, where's the lower third? Also, I thought my son's teacher asked a really good question as part of his homework.
Yeah.
She asked, she said, given what you've learned about the Big Bang, do you believe that there could be other things from the Big Bang that you could measure and observe?
Ooh.
And, I asked my son, I'm like, so if you found microwave radiation, is it conceivable that you could measure other radiation or other artifacts in the universe that could be a result of the Big Bang? He's like, yeah, but probably there's other stuff out there, right? And I thought that was a really good kind of. We talked about troubleshooting.
Yeah, like the restaurant at the edge of the universe.
Yeah,
you put a hook on it and it just keeps going, right?
Right. So I thought it was really cool, really good. I tend to pick on some of the educational institution, things here in the U.S., but I thought that was a really good lesson.
Yep. So mine was a California town smells like rotten eggs, vomit, farts, and bodily odor. And I'm
more science.
I'm like, this could be the studio, or Paul. It could be our teenagers' room.
It could be totally our teenagers' room.
Yeah,
right?
Hopefully minus the vomit, but we all know that they've been sick and probably vomited on the carpet, and that's still there. It turns out that it is in fact the decaying of marine life that hasn't been recycled through some of the water.
It was something like in waterways due to a drought. There wasn't
the red water thing.
Yeah, kind of deal.
Reminded me of swamp gas, UFOs and swamp gas and stuff.
But this reminded me of us in that, so many years ago we said, I love this industry because we can talk about vomit, burp, and snort and not be talking about a bodily function.
And security conferences sometimes smell the same way, quite honestly.
Yeah. As does my teenager's room.
Might
even argue that my 8-year-old's room smells very much the same.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
If you live in a house with 3 boys like I do, their bathroom smells the same way.
Oh God,
they can't. Dude, targeting is tough. They're like stormtroopers trying to hit a target.
Dude, I have 3 women in my house, and the 2 younger women, the 2 girls, they have this habit of closing the bathroom door and putting a sign on it that says out of order. No, that's not the correct answer. Go plunge the damn thing. The plunger is right next to the toilet, and you both know how to use it.
But can you imagine living in this town and just smelling this heinous smell and people got sick from it?
Yeah,
as well, which is just
headaches, nausea, and other ailments.
Oh, just awful.
Yep. Don't go into your kids' rooms.
Nope.
Teenage funk. Smells like teen spirit.
Yes.
All right.
Very much so. Do we have other articles, or was that?
I think that's it. I think
we're done.
Tap out.
Woo! Well, thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
It's over and farts.